That's the ultimatum Clara Whitmore faces in a Nebraska courtroom packed with vultures disguised as men. They're not here to help. They're here to pick her bones clean. Her husband's dead. Her farm's drowning in debt. And the judge? He's already decided she's too fat, too stupid, too female to own land. So he's forcing her hand, marry one of these leering bastards right now, or watch everything burn. But Clara's done being the punchline. She's about to make a choice that'll shatter this room and maybe get her killed. Stick with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The courtroom smelled like sweat, tobacco, and something Clara couldn't name, maybe contempt. It clung to the air the way dust clung to everything in Nebraska during a drought, thick and suffocating. She stood before Judge Holloway's bench with her hands folded at her waist, trying to keep them from shaking. The wood floor creaked under her weight, and she hated herself for noticing, hated herself more for caring. Holloway peered down at her over wire-rimmed glasses, his thin mouth pressed into a line that might have been sympathy on another man. On him, it just looked like impatience. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, her name flattened by his nasal tone, "this court has reviewed your late husband's debts. The sum is considerable." Clara didn't flinch. She'd known the number for weeks, had turned it over in her mind like a stone she couldn't put down. $3,418. Might as well have been $3 million. She didn't have it, didn't have a tenth of it. "Yes, Your Honor," she said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. "The bank has filed for immediate seizure of your property," Holloway continued, shuffling papers that probably didn't need shuffling. "Under territorial law, a widow without means may be granted an extension if she can demonstrate to support, financial support." Clara's jaw tightened. She knew what was coming. Everyone in this room knew. "Meaning a husband," Holloway said, as if she were too dim to piece it together. "Marry within the hour, Mrs. Whitmore, and the court will grant you a 30-day stay. Refuse, and the farm is forfeit today. This minute." A ripple of noise rolled through the gallery behind her. Low voices, boots scraping floor, the creak of benches. She didn't turn around, didn't need to. She'd felt their eyes on her since she walked in, weighing her like livestock at auction. 30 men, maybe more, crammed into a courtroom that barely held 20 comfortably. Some she recognized. Most she didn't. None of them were here for her. "Your Honor," she began, but Holloway cut her off with a raised hand. "I'm not finished." He glanced past her, addressing the room. "Gentlemen, this is an unusual circumstance, but the law is clear. Mrs. Whitmore requires a husband willing to assume her debts. If any man here is prepared to make such an offer, step forward now." The room shifted. Clara felt it more than heard it. A collective lean forward, a predatory interest snapping into focus. Her stomach turned. A man stood in the third row, thick neck, thinning hair, hands like slabs of meat. She didn't know his name, but she'd seen him at the general store. He always stared too long. "I'll take her," he said. Not to her, to Holloway. "Farm's got good water access. I'll marry her, pay half the debt. Rest she can work off." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Not loud, just enough to sting. Clara's face burned, but she kept her expression flat. "Generous, Mr. Kern," Holloway said dryly, "but the debt must be settled in full or guaranteed by collateral. Do you have such collateral?" Kern's face darkened. He sat down hard, muttering something Clara didn't catch, didn't want to. Another man stood, older, gray-beard, missing 2 fingers on his left hand. "I got livestock," he said. 40 head of cattle. "That'll cover it?" "40 head won't cover half," someone shouted from the back. More laughter. The gray-bearded man spat onto the floor and sat down. 3 more men stood in quick succession. Each one made an offer that barely touched the debt. Each one looked at Clara like she was a burden they'd tolerate if the price was right. Holloway dismissed them all with increasing irritation, his gavel rapping the bench like a metronome counting down her life. Clara's hands were trembling now, no matter how tightly she gripped them together. The room felt smaller with every second, the walls pressing in. She wanted to scream, to run, to tell every man in this room exactly what she thought of them, but she didn't, because that's what they expected. The fat widow, hysterical and helpless. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. "Anyone else?" Holloway's voice had taken on a bored edge. He was already reaching for his gavel, ready to end this farce. Silence. Clara closed her eyes. The farm was gone. The land her father had broken his back to clear, the house where she'd buried her mother, the fields she'd tended every day since Thomas died. Gone. She'd be out on the street by sunset, no money, no prospects, nothing but the clothes on her back and a reputation that would follow her like a shadow. "I'll marry her." The voice came from the back corner, quiet but clear. Every head in the room turned. Clara opened her eyes. A man stood near the rear door, half hidden in shadow. Dust covered his coat, his hat, his boots, like he'd ridden straight through a storm to get here. He was tall, lean in a way that suggested hardness rather than hunger. Dark hair fell past his collar, and his face was unshaven, weathered. He looked like he'd spent more time sleeping under stars than roofs. "And you are?" Holloway's irritation sharpened into suspicion. "Elias Crow." The man stepped forward, moving with an easy, unhurried gait that somehow made the room feel smaller. His eyes swept the crowd once, a glance that lingered on no one, before settling on the judge. "I'll cover the debt. All of it." The room went dead silent. Clara stared at him. She'd never seen this man before in her life. Holloway leaned forward, glasses slipping down his nose. "You have $3,000, Mr. Crow?" "I do." "On your person?" "No, but I can have it here by end of week." A snort of laughter came from somewhere in the crowd. "Sure you can, Drifter." Elias didn't react, didn't even glance toward the speaker. His gaze stayed locked on Holloway, patient and unreadable. The judge frowned, clearly weighing his options. He didn't like Elias, that much was obvious, but he also didn't have a better offer, and the longer this dragged on, the worse it looked for everyone involved. "This court requires proof of funds," Holloway said slowly. "Do you have any documentation, a bank letter, anything?" Elias reached into his coat. Half the men in the room tensed, hands drifting toward belts and pockets, but he only pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn soft at the creases. He walked forward and handed it to the bailiff, who carried it up to Holloway. The judge unfolded it, scanned the contents, and his expression shifted. Just a flicker, but Clara caught it. Surprise, maybe unease. "This is a letter of credit from a bank in Kansas City," Holloway said, his tone carefully neutral. "Signed by Charles Drummond." A murmur ran through the crowd. Clara didn't recognize the name, but clearly others did. "Drummond's good for it," someone muttered. "If Crow's got his backing, the money's real." Holloway set the letter down, his fingers drumming the bench. He looked at Elias like a man trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "Why?" Elias tilted his head slightly. "Why what?" "Why marry a woman you don't know to pay a debt that isn't yours?" It was the question on everyone's mind. Clara felt the weight of it pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. She wanted to know too. Wanted to understand why this stranger, this dust-covered ghost of a man, had walked into her life and offered to save it. Elias didn't answer right away. He turned finally and looked at Clara for the first time. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds. They didn't linger on her body, didn't catalog her flaws the way every other man's had. He just looked at her face, steady and calm, like he was trying to see past the surface. "Because she didn't ask for any of this," he said quietly. "And she deserves better than what this room's offering." Clara's breath caught. Holloway made a disgusted noise in the back of his throat. "Noble sentiments, Mr. Crow. But sentiment doesn't pay debts." "No," Elias agreed. "Money does. And I've got it." The judge stared at him for a long moment, then sighed heavily. "Very well. Mrs. Whitmore, do you consent to marry this man?" Clara's heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was insane. She didn't know Elias Crow from Adam. He could be a thief, a liar, a killer. He could take her farm and disappear, leave her worse off than before. But he was also the only man in this room who'd looked her in the eye. "Yes," she said. Her voice didn't shake. Holloway's gavel cracked down like a gunshot. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Nebraska, I declare you husband and wife. Bailiff, witness the marriage certificate. Mr. Crow, you have 7 days to deliver the funds to this court, or the property reverts to the bank." Court adjourned. The room erupted into noise, protests, arguments, someone shouting about the legality of it all. But Clara barely heard any of it. She was too busy staring at the man who'd just become her husband. Elias walked toward her, weaving through the crowd with the same unhurried calm. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the scar that ran along his jawline, the way his coat hung loose over what looked like a gun belt underneath. "We should go," he said quietly. "Go where?" "Your farm. We need to talk." Clara wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but the look in his eyes stopped her. Not unkind, just urgent, like he knew something she didn't. "All right," she said. They pushed through the crowd together, Clara moving slowly because her legs felt unsteady, Elias staying close without touching her. Men stepped aside as they passed, some glaring, others just watching with unreadable expressions. Kern spat on the floor near Clara's feet, and she flinched before she could stop herself. Elias stopped walking. "You got something to say?" His voice was still quiet, but it had an edge now, sharp enough to cut. Kern sneered. "Just wondering how long it'll take you to realize what you bought, Crow. Longer than it'll take you to realize what you lost." Elias's hand rested on his belt, near the holster Clara had noticed earlier. "Now get out of the way." Kern's sneer faltered. He stepped back. They made it outside into the gray afternoon, the sky heavy with unshed rain. Clara's wagon was hitched near the courthouse steps, her old mare standing with her head down, half asleep. Elias glanced at it, then at the street beyond, his gaze sweeping the buildings, the alleys, the rooftops. "You always this careful?" Clara asked. "Always." He helped her into the wagon, his hand on her elbow, steadying but not pulling, then climbed up beside her and took the reins without asking. Clara almost protested, but she was too tired. Let him drive. She'd driven herself into this mess. Maybe it was time to let someone else take the reins for a minute. They rolled out of town in silence, the mare's hooves clopping against the hard dirt road. The plains stretched out on either side, endless and flat, the grass bending under the wind. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and heavy. Clara finally found her voice. "Why did you do that?" Elias didn't look at her. "I told you. You deserved better." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got right now." She studied his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the way his eyes never stopped moving, scanning the road ahead and the fields on either side. He looked like a man expecting trouble. "Do I need to be scared of you?" she asked. That got his attention. He turned, meeting her gaze directly. "No," he said, "but you might need to be scared of what's coming." A chill ran down Clara's spine. "What's coming?" Before he could answer, a gunshot cracked through the air. The mare screamed and bolted, nearly throwing Clara from the wagon. Elias grabbed her arm, hauling her back as another shot rang out, this one closer. Wood splintered near Clara's head, and she ducked instinctively, her heart slamming into her ribs. "Hold on!" Elias shouted. He snapped the reins hard, urging the mare into a full gallop. The wagon lurched forward, wheels bouncing over ruts and rocks. Clara clung to the seat with both hands, her knuckles white. Behind them, riders appeared on the road. 4 of them, kicking up dust as they closed the distance. They wore dark coats and wide-brimmed hats pulled low, faces obscured. One of them raised a rifle. "Get down!" Elias shoved Clara toward the wagon bed, and she tumbled backward, landing hard on a pile of empty feed sacks. Pain shot through her shoulder, but she swallowed the cry and pressed herself flat. Another shot, then another. The mare was screaming, foam flying from her mouth as she ran. Clara had never seen the old horse move this fast, didn't think she could. The wagon rattled so violently she thought it might shake apart. Elias pulled a revolver from his coat, twisted in the seat, and fired 3 times in quick succession. Clara couldn't see if he hit anything, but the riders didn't slow down. "Who are they?" she shouted over the wind and gunfire. "Later!" Elias fired again, the shot deafening. "Just stay down!" The road curved ahead, cutting between 2 low hills. Elias yanked the reins, steering the wagon hard to the right. They left the road entirely, plunging into the open field. The ride got worse, bone-jarring, teeth-rattling chaos. Clara bit her tongue and tasted blood. The riders followed, spreading out to flank them. One pulled alongside, close enough that Clara could see his face, hard, scarred, eyes like chips of ice. He aimed a pistol directly at her. Elias shot him. The man jerked backward and tumbled from his horse, hitting the ground in a cloud of dust. His horse veered away, riderless. The other three didn't stop, didn't even slow down. "They're not giving up," Clara yelled. "I noticed." The hills rose around them now, narrowing the field into a bottleneck. Elias pushed the mare harder, and Clara could hear the animal's labored breathing, could see the sweat darkening her coat. They couldn't keep this up much longer. One of the riders pulled ahead, cutting them off. He raised his rifle. Elias swerved left, so hard the wagon tilted onto two wheels. Clara screamed, certain they were going to flip, but the wheels slammed back down, and they shot forward into a narrow gap between the hills. The gap led into a ravine, steep-walled and shadowed. The wagon plunged downward, gravity pulling them faster than the mare could control. Clara could hear the brakes screaming as Elias tried to slow them, but it wasn't enough. They hit the bottom with a bone-shaking crash. The mare stumbled, nearly went down, but caught herself and kept running. Behind them, the riders reached the top of the ravine and stopped. Clara looked back, breathing hard. The men sat on their horses, silhouetted against the sky. One of them raised a hand almost like a salute. Then they turned and rode away. Elias didn't stop. He kept the mare moving, slower now, but still urgent, until they were a mile into the ravine and the riders were long out of sight. Only then did he pull the horse to a halt. The silence that followed felt unnatural, oppressive. Clara could hear her own heartbeat, could hear Elias breathing hard beside her, could hear the mare wheezing and stamping. "What?" Clara said slowly. "The hell was that?" Elias holstered his gun, his hand shaking just slightly. "That," he said, "was a warning." "A warning from who?" He turned to look at her, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes that might have been fear. "People who think you have something they want." "I don't have anything." "Your husband did." Clara's blood went cold. "Thomas?" Elias nodded grimly. "Yeah, Thomas." The sky opened up and rain began to fall, cold, heavy drops that soaked through Clara's dress in seconds. She stared at Elias, at the stranger she'd just married, and realized she'd traded one nightmare for another. "Tell me everything," she said. Elias glanced back the way they'd come, then at the darkening sky. "Not here. We need to keep moving." "Where?" "Somewhere safe." He snapped the reins, and the exhausted mare started forward again, slow but steady. If such a place even exists anymore. Clara pulled herself back onto the seat, soaked and shaking, her mind racing. Thomas had been a quiet man, a farmer, unremarkable in every way. What could he possibly have done to bring gunmen after her? The rain fell harder, turning the ravine floor into mud. The wagon wheels sank deep with every turn, and Clara could feel the mare struggling. She wanted to stop, to rest, to demand answers, but Elias's face told her they couldn't afford to. So she held on, and she kept her mouth shut, and she tried not to think about the fact that she'd just married a man who carried a gun like he knew how to use it, and who expected to need it again soon. Thunder rolled across the sky, low and threatening, and Clara Whitmore, widow, farmer, woman who'd been dismissed her entire life, felt the ground shift beneath her. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The ravine eventually opened into flatter ground, but the rain didn't let up. It came down in sheets now, turning everything into a gray blur. Clara's dress clung to her skin, heavy and cold, and her teeth had started chattering. The mare plodded forward with her head low, every step looking like it might be her last. Elias hadn't spoken in over an hour. He just kept scanning the horizon, his jaw tight, one hand resting near his gun, even though the reins required both hands to manage the struggling horse. Clara wanted to break the silence, to demand the answers he'd promised, but something in his posture told her to wait. Finally, when the light had faded to almost nothing, and Clara could barely see 10 feet ahead, Elias pulled the wagon off what passed for a path and into a dense cluster of cottonwood trees. The branches overhead provided some shelter from the rain, though not much. "We'll stop here," he said, his voice rough from disuse. Clara climbed down from the wagon, her legs nearly buckling when her feet hit the ground. Everything hurt, her back, her shoulders, her hands from gripping the seat so hard. She leaned against the wagon wheel, breathing hard, while Elias unhitched the mare and led her to a patch of grass. "She needs water," Clara said. "I know." Elias pulled a collapsible canvas bucket from under the wagon seat. Clara hadn't even known it was there, and filled it from a nearby runoff stream swollen with rainwater. The mare drank greedily, and he let her drink her fill before tying her loosely to a tree where she could reach more grass. Clara watched him work, noticing details she'd missed before. The way he moved with precision, no wasted motion. The way he positioned himself so he could see both the wagon and the open ground beyond the trees. The way his hand kept drifting to his gun, an unconscious gesture that spoke of long habit. "You're not a farmer," she said. Elias glanced at her, then went back to checking the mare's legs for injuries. "No." "Then what are you?" "Right now, your husband." Clara's jaw tightened. "That's not an answer. It's the one you're getting until we're somewhere safer than this." "We're alone in the middle of nowhere. How much safer do you need?" Elias straightened, meeting her eyes. In the fading light, his face looked harder, older. "Those men will be looking for us. They know the area better than I do. We stopped because the horse can't go any farther, not because we're safe. So I need you to trust me just a little while longer." "Trust you?" Clara let out a bitter laugh. "I don't even know you." "You married me." "Because you were the only option that didn't make my skin crawl." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, echoing in the small space beneath the trees. Elias didn't react, just stood there watching her with those unreadable gray eyes. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly exhausted. "I'm sorry, that wasn't fair." "Yes, it was." Elias turned back to the wagon, rifling through the bed until he found a canvas tarp. He shook it out and draped it over the lowest branches, creating a crude shelter. "You didn't ask for any of this. You're entitled to be angry." "I'm not angry. I'm scared." "Good. Fear keeps you alive." He said it so matter-of-factly that Clara didn't know how to respond. She watched him work in silence, creating a small dry space beneath the tarp. When he was done, he gestured for her to sit. "Get under there. Try to stay dry." Clara hesitated, then crawled under the shelter. The ground was muddy, but it was better than standing in the rain. Elias stayed outside, keeping watch, his back to a tree trunk. "You should rest too," Clara said. "I will, later." "When?" "When I'm sure we're alone." Clara pulled her knees to her chest, trying to preserve what little warmth she had left. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since morning, and morning felt like a lifetime ago. "There's cornbread in the sack," she said, "and some dried beef. Not much, but it's something." Elias found the food and brought it under the tarp, settling near the edge where he could still see out. He handed Clara the larger portion, and when she tried to refuse, he just set it in front of her and started eating his own piece. They ate in silence, the rain drumming steadily on the canvas above them. The cornbread was stale, the beef tough. But Clara's body didn't care. She ate every crumb, her hands shaking slightly as she wiped her mouth. "Your husband," Elias said quietly, breaking the silence. "What did he tell you about his work?" Clara looked up, startled. "Thomas?" "He was a farmer, that's all." "He never traveled? Never had visitors you didn't recognize?" "No. Well," she paused, thinking back. "Sometimes he'd go into Omaha for supplies. He'd be gone 2-3 days. But that was normal. Everyone does that." "Did he ever come back different?" "Different how?" "Nervous, distracted, looking over his shoulder." Clara frowned, trying to remember. Thomas had been a quiet man, hard to read even after 5 years of marriage. But there had been a time, maybe 6 months before he died, when he'd seemed off, jumpy. He'd started locking the barn even though they had nothing worth stealing, and once she'd found him burning papers in the stove in the middle of summer. "Maybe," she said slowly. "The last few months before the accident, he was tense. I thought it was money troubles. We'd had a bad harvest." "What kind of accident?" The question hit her like a slap. Claire's throat tightened. "He was fixing the well. The rope broke. He fell." "You saw it happen?" "No, I found him after." She could still see it in her mind. Thomas lying at the bottom of that well, his neck bent at an impossible angle, his eyes open and empty. "Why does it matter?" Elias didn't answer right away. He was staring out into the rain, his expression unreadable. "Because I don't think it was an accident." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. What? The men who came after us today, they're professionals. They don't chase down random farm wives for fun. They think you have something valuable enough to kill for. I don't have anything. Your husband did, and they think he gave it to you before he died. Clara shook her head, trying to process what he was saying. That's insane. Thomas didn't have anything. We were barely scraping by. On the surface, maybe. But he was involved in something, Clara, something dangerous. And whatever it was, it got him killed. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and terrible. Clara wanted to argue, to defend Thomas's memory, but the pieces were starting to fit together in a way that made her stomach turn. The locked barn, the burned papers, the way he'd sometimes stare at her across the dinner table like he wanted to say something but couldn't. What was he involved in? She whispered. I don't know yet, but those writers, they work for someone named Dalton Mercer. Ever heard that name? Clara shook her head. Mercer runs most of the illegal operations between here and Kansas City. Gambling, smuggling, extortion. If Thomas crossed him, or if he had something Mercer wants, then why marry me? Clara interrupted, her voice rising. If you knew all this, why drag me into it? Elias finally looked at her, and for the first time she saw something like regret in his eyes. Because Mercer's men were already watching the courthouse. If I hadn't stepped in, someone else would have married you, paid your debt, and taken you somewhere private to ask questions. And when you couldn't answer them, they would have hurt you until they were sure you were telling the truth. Clara's breath caught. How do you know all this? Because I've been tracking Mercer for 2 years. Your husband's name came up in my investigation 3 months ago. By the time I traced him to your farm, he was already dead. I thought that was the end of it. He paused, jaw working. Then I heard about the debt, about the forced marriage. I realized Mercer hadn't given up. He still thinks Thomas hid something, and he thinks you know where it is. But I don't. I believe you. Mercer won't. Clara pressed her hands to her face, trying to breathe through the panic clawing at her chest. This couldn't be happening. Thomas had been boring, predictable, safe. He couldn't have been involved with criminals. He couldn't have... A sound cut through the rain, distant but distinct. Horses. Elias was on his feet in an instant, gun drawn. Stay here. Don't move. He disappeared into the darkness before Clara could respond, moving so quietly she couldn't hear his footsteps. She sat frozen under the tarp, her heart hammering, straining to hear over the rain. Voices drifted through the trees, too far away to make out words. Then closer. Then right on top of them. Saw the wagon tracks heading this way. Can't be far. Clara's blood turned to ice. She recognized that voice. It belonged to one of the riders who'd chased them. Spread out. They're holed up somewhere close. Footsteps. Splashing through puddles. Getting closer. Clara's hand found a rock near her knee. It was small, probably useless, but holding it made her feel slightly less helpless. She pressed herself against the wagon wheel, trying to make herself invisible. A man appeared through the rain, maybe 20 feet away. He held a rifle, sweeping it back and forth as he walked. Clara held her breath, willing him not to look toward the tarp. He kept walking, passed right by. Then he stopped. Clara saw him tilt his head, listening. He turned slowly, his gaze moving toward the wagon. Elias stepped out of the shadows behind him and brought the butt of his gun down on the man's head. The man crumpled without a sound. Run, Elias hissed. Clara didn't hesitate. She scrambled out from under the tarp and ran, her skirts tangling around her legs, the mud sucking at her boots. Elias was right behind her, pulling her toward the densest part of the trees. Shouts erupted behind them. More voices. Then gunfire. Bullets tore through the branches overhead, raining leaves and splinters. Clara ducked instinctively, nearly fell, caught herself on a tree trunk. Elias grabbed her arm and hauled her forward, practically dragging her through the undergrowth. They burst out of the tree line into open ground and immediately realized their mistake. 3 riders were waiting, spread out in a semicircle, blocking any escape. Elias shoved Clara behind him, raising his gun. Don't move! The center rider spurred his horse forward a few steps. In the dim light, Clara could just make out his face, weathered, scarred, with eyes that held no warmth at all. Smart move, Crow, the man said. His voice was rough, like gravel sliding over metal. But not smart enough. Drop the gun. No. You're outnumbered. I've been outnumbered before. The man smiled, showing teeth stained brown from tobacco. True. But you've never had a woman to protect before. Changes the math, doesn't it? Elias's finger tightened on the trigger, but he didn't fire. Clara could feel the tension radiating off him, could see the calculations running through his head. 3 armed men on horseback, 2 people on foot in the open, no cover, no backup. They were going to die here. The thought came to Clara with strange clarity, and with it came something she hadn't expected. Anger. Pure, burning anger. She'd spent her whole life being dismissed, underestimated, pushed around. And now she was going to die in the mud because her dead husband had gotten tangled up in something he should have left alone. No. She stepped out from behind Elias. Clara, he started, but she cut him off. You want something from me, she said, addressing the scarred rider. What is it? The man's smile widened. Smart woman. Your husband had something that belongs to my employer. A map. You're going to tell me where it is. I don't know anything about a map. Wrong answer. He drew a pistol with casual ease. But we've got all night to help you remember. She doesn't know, Elias said, his voice hard. Thomas didn't tell her anything. You're wasting your time. Maybe. But Mercer wants to be sure. The rider cocked his pistol. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to drop that gun, Crow. Then you're both going to come with us, nice and quiet. Or I can shoot you right now and take just the woman. Your choice. Clara's mind raced. A map. Thomas had left her a map? To what? She tried to remember anything that might qualify, old land surveys, sketches, anything, but came up blank. Unless it wasn't that kind of map. A memory surfaced, sudden and sharp. Thomas's last day, the morning before he died. She'd gone into the barn to collect eggs and found him at his workbench, hunched over something. When he'd heard her coming, he'd shoved whatever it was into a leather satchel and locked it in the old steamer trunk where he kept his father's things. She'd thought nothing of it at the time. Now, the trunk, she said quietly. Elias glanced back at her, eyes wide. What? Thomas had an old trunk. In the barn. He locked something in it the day he died. I never opened it. I didn't have the key. The scarred rider leaned forward in his saddle. Where's this trunk now? At the farm. Where else would it be? For a long moment, no one moved. The rain continued its relentless drumming, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. The rider studied Clara's face, looking for deception. You're coming with us, he said finally. Both of you. We're going to that farm, and you're going to open that trunk. If the map's there, you live. If it's not, he shrugged. Well, we'll cross that bridge. And if we refuse? Elias asked. Then I shoot the woman. You can watch her bleed out, or you can cooperate. Again, your choice. Clara felt Elias tense beside her, felt him weighing options that didn't exist. She reached out and touched his arm gently. It's okay, she said softly. We'll go. Clarice, they'll kill us either way. At least this way we buy some time. Elias looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing across his face. Then slowly, he lowered his gun. Smart, the rider said. Now drop it. Elias let the gun fall into the mud. 2 of the riders dismounted and approached, pulling ropes from their saddlebags. They bound Clara's wrists first, the rope biting into her skin, then did the same to Elias. The scarred rider watched from his horse, that horrible smile never leaving his face. There's a shack about 2 miles east, he said to his men. We'll hole up there until morning. Mercer wants this done clean, and I can't see shit in this rain. We'll head to the farm at first light. They were forced to walk, stumbling through the mud and darkness while the riders followed on horseback. Clara's boots kept slipping, and twice she fell, scraping her knees through her dress. Each time Elias tried to help her up and was shoved back by one of the men. Keep moving, the scarred rider said, or I'll drag you. Clara gritted her teeth and kept walking. The shack materialized out of the rain like something from a nightmare. A sagging structure of rotted wood and rusted metal, barely standing. But it had a roof, and that was enough. The riders herded Clara and Elias inside, shoving them into a corner. The interior was even worse than the exterior. Dirt floor, broken furniture, holes in the walls where the wind whistled through. But it was dry, mostly, and one of the men got a fire going in the old stone fireplace. Clara and Elias sat with their backs to the wall, wrists still bound. The three riders settled near the fire, passing a bottle between them and talking in low voices. The scarred one, their leader, clearly, kept glancing toward Clara and Elias, his hand never far from his gun. "I'm sorry," Elias said quietly, so only Clara could hear. "For what?" "Getting you into this." Clara almost laughed. "You didn't get me into anything. Thomas did. Or maybe I did it to myself when I married him without really knowing him." She leaned her head back against the wall, suddenly so tired she could barely keep her eyes open. "What's on this map they want so badly?" "If I had to guess, routes, names, locations of Mercer's operations. Thomas must have been gathering evidence, planning to turn it over to the authorities. That's the only reason Mercer would want it this badly. Why would Thomas do something like that? Maybe he had a crisis of conscience. Maybe Mercer threatened him. Maybe both." Elias shifted, trying to find a more comfortable position with his hands tied. Either way, he chose to fight back. That took guts. It also got him killed. Yeah, it did. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain and the low murmur of the men's conversation. Clara's mind kept drifting to the trunk in the barn, to the possibility that she'd been living with something dangerous all these months without knowing it. "If the map's real," she said, "and we give it to them, they'll kill us anyway. Won't they?" Elias didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was flat, factual. "Yes." "So what do we do?" "We survive the night. Then we figure out the rest." "That's not a plan." "It's all I've got right now." Clara closed her eyes, fighting the despair that threatened to swallow her whole. She was so far out of her depth, it wasn't even funny. These men were killers, professionals, and she was just a farmer's widow who could barely read and had never been more than 50 miles from where she was born. But she was also still alive, and as long as she was alive, she could fight back, even if she had no idea how. The night dragged on, measured in the slow burning of the fire and the occasional cough or shift from the riders. Clara dozed fitfully, her head dropping onto Elias's shoulder more than once. He didn't seem to sleep at all, just sat rigid and alert, his eyes tracking every movement in the room. Sometime near dawn, the scarred rider stood and kicked dirt over the fire. "Time to move," he said. "Daylight's coming, and I want to be at that farm before noon." They were hauled to their feet, still bound, and pushed back out into the rain. It had lightened somewhat, but the sky remained gray and heavy. The riders mounted up, and this time Clara and Elias were forced onto a single horse, hands still tied, Clara in front and Elias behind. The ride to the farm took less than an hour. Clara recognized the landscape as they got closer. The crooked oak tree that marked the property line, the stone fence her grandfather had built, the weathered barn sitting like a monument to years of hard work. Home, or what used to be home. They stopped in the yard and the scarred rider dismounted, hauling Clara down with him. She hit the ground hard, pain shooting through her ankle, but she bit down on the cry and forced herself to stand. "The barn," she said. "The trunk's in the barn." The rider studied her face, then nodded to his men. "Check it first. Make sure she's not lying." Two of the men disappeared into the barn, while the third kept his rifle trained on Clara and Elias. The scarred rider lit a cigarette, watching the barn door with lazy patience. Minutes crawled by. Then one of the men emerged, carrying the old steamer trunk. It was smaller than Clara remembered, battered and scarred from years of use. He set it down in the mud at the rider's feet. "Locked," the man said. The scarred rider looked at Clara. "Key?" "I don't have it. I told you, Thomas locked it, and I never found where he put the key." For a moment she thought he might shoot her just for the inconvenience, but then he smiled that terrible smile and drew his pistol. "That's fine. We'll just open it the old-fashioned way." He aimed at the lock and fired. The shot echoed across the farm, and the lock shattered, pieces of metal flying. The rider holstered his gun and knelt, flipping open the trunk's lid. Clara held her breath. Inside was a leather satchel, exactly as she remembered. The rider pulled it out and opened it, his scarred fingers rifling through the contents. Papers. Dozens of them. Covered in writing and strange symbols Clara couldn't make out from where she stood. The rider's smile faded. He pulled out page after page, studying them with growing frustration. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. Elias leaned forward, squinting. Then his face went pale. It's code. What? Thomas encrypted it. The map's here, but it's written in some kind of cipher. You can't read it. The scarred rider's face darkened. He grabbed one of the papers and shoved it at Clara. Then you decrypt it. Clara stared at the symbols, her stomach sinking. I can't. I don't know how. Thomas never... The rider backhanded her across the face. Clara's head snapped to the side, stars exploding in her vision. She tasted blood, felt her lips split. Before she could recover, the rider grabbed her by the hair and yanked her head back. Don't lie to me, he hissed, his breath hot and foul against her face. Your husband wouldn't encrypt this without giving you a way to read it. I'm not lying, Clara's voice cracked, tears streaming down her face. I don't know. He didn't tell me anything. The rider drew a knife, pressing the blade against her throat. Clara felt the cold steel bite into her skin, felt a trickle of warmth slide down her neck. Last chance, the rider said softly. And Clara, staring into those dead eyes, realized something that should have terrified her, but instead filled her with a strange, cold calm. She was going to die. Whether she gave him answers or not, whether the map was real or fake, whether she begged or stayed silent, none of it mattered. This man was going to kill her, so she might as well go out on her own terms. Go to hell, she whispered. The rider's eyes widened slightly, surprised. Then he smiled. And then his head exploded. The gunshot came from the barn loft, sharp and final. The scarred rider's body dropped like a puppet with cut strings, the knife clattering from his hand. Blood and worse splattered across Clara's dress, hot and wet, and for a moment she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what had just happened. Then everything exploded into chaos. The two remaining riders dove for cover, one behind the water trough, the other behind their horses. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. The barn, the house, somewhere near the fence line. Clara hit the ground hard, her bound hands making it impossible to catch herself. Pain shot through her shoulder, but adrenaline drowned it out. Elias was already moving. He rolled to the dead rider's body, using his bound hands to fumble for the knife. His fingers closed around the handle just as one of the men fired at him. The bullet kicked up mud inches from his head. Clara, the barn, now! She didn't think, just scrambled to her feet and ran. Her boots slipped in the mud, her dress tangled around her legs, but she kept moving. Behind her, gunfire cracked like thunder, bullets whining through the air. She made it to the barn door and threw herself through, landing hard on the hay-strewn floor. Footsteps pounded on the loft ladder. A man appeared above her, middle-aged, gray-bearded, holding a rifle still smoking from the shot that had saved her life. He wasn't looking at her, though. His attention was locked on the yard outside. Two left, he called down. Mason's got one pinned by the fence. Where's the other? Moving toward the house, another voice shouted from somewhere Clara couldn't see. The gray-bearded man fired twice in quick succession, the rifle's report deafening in the enclosed space. Clara pressed her hands over her ears, her whole body shaking. She'd never been in a gunfight before, never even heard shots fired in anger. The violence of it, the noise and chaos and smell of powder and blood, threatened to overwhelm her completely. Elias burst through the barn door, still bound but clutching the knife. He dropped to his knees beside Clara, sawing at the ropes around her wrists with frantic urgency. You hit? He demanded. No, I don't think so. You're covered in blood. It's not mine. The ropes parted, and Clara's hands came free. They were numb, fingers tingling as circulation returned. Elias was already working on his own bonds, cutting them loose with quick, efficient motions. The moment his hands were free, he grabbed Clara's arm. Basement! There's a root cellar under the floor. Get in it and don't come out until I say. What? No! This isn't a discussion. Another burst of gunfire cut off her protest. Something shattered in the loft above them, raining splinters down. The gray-bearded man cursed and ducked back from the window. Bastard's got a repeater, he yelled. I'm pinned! Elias shoved the knife into Clara's hands. Cellar, now. I mean it, Clara. He was gone before she could argue, running in a low crouch toward the loft ladder. Clara watched him go, her mind screaming at her to follow, to help, to do something other than hide. But she also wasn't stupid enough to think she'd be anything but a liability in a gunfight. She ran for the back corner of the barn where the cellar door was hidden under a pile of old grain sacks. She'd used it maybe twice in 5 years, mostly to store potatoes during winter. Now she yanked the door open and stared down into the darkness below. The sound of splintering wood made her decision. She grabbed the edge of the opening and lowered herself down, her feet finding the ladder rungs by feel. The cellar was pitch black and smelled like earth and rot. Clara pulled the door shut above her and descended into the darkness. The gunfire was muffled down here, distant thuds and cracks that barely penetrated the packed earth walls. Clara reached the bottom of the ladder and crouched in the darkness, the knife gripped so tightly her knuckles ached. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She tried to count the shots, to track who was firing and from where, but it was impossible. Everything blurred together into one continuous roar. Then silence. It fell so suddenly that Clara almost didn't believe it. She waited, listening, her breath loud in her own ears. Nothing. No shots? No voices? Just the faint creak of the barn settling and the distant sound of rain on the roof. She waited for Elias to call down to her, waited for someone to open the cellar door and tell her it was safe. But no one came. Minutes dragged by, each one longer than the last. Clara's imagination filled the silence with horrors. Elias dead. The gray-bearded stranger dead. Mercer's men searching the barn, finding the cellar door, opening it to find her cowering in the dark like a trapped animal. She couldn't just sit here. Clara climbed back up the ladder slowly, trying to keep quiet. At the top, she pressed her ear to the door and listened. Still nothing. She eased the door open just a crack, wincing at every tiny creak of the hinges. The barn was empty. She climbed out, knife in hand, and moved toward the main door. Sunlight was trying to break through the clouds outside, casting strange shadows across the muddy yard. The dead rider still lay where he'd fallen, his body already beginning to stiffen. The trunk sat open beside him, papers scattered by the wind. No sign of Elias. No sign of anyone. Clara stepped into the yard, her boots squelching in the mud. Elias? No answer. She walked toward the house, every nerve screaming at her to run the other way. The front door stood open, swinging slightly in the breeze. Blood stained the porch steps, a dark trail leading inside. Elias? Her voice cracked. Movement in the doorway made her jump. Elias appeared, his face grim, his shirt torn and bloody. Relief flooded through Clara so powerfully her knees nearly buckled. You're alive. Yeah. He looked exhausted, years older than he had this morning. Come inside, we need to talk. Clara followed him into the house, her house, which suddenly felt foreign and dangerous. The gray-bearded man sat at her kitchen table, pressing a cloth to a wound on his arm. Another man stood by the window, younger, with sharp eyes and a marshal's badge pinned to his vest. Clara, Elias said, this is Samuel Hayes and Deputy Frank Mason. They've been helping me track Mercer's operation. Samuel, the gray-bearded man, nodded to her. Ma'am, sorry about the dramatics. We tried to intercept them before they got to your farm, but he gestured vaguely at the chaos outside. The other 2 riders? Clara asked. Dead, Mason said flatly. He was cleaning his rifle, his movements mechanical. We didn't have a choice. Clara sank into a chair, her legs finally giving out. She was in shock, she realized distantly. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking, and there was a strange ringing in her ears that wouldn't go away. Here, Elias pressed a cup into her hands. Water, blessedly cold. She drank it in 3 gulps, some of it spilling down her chin. What happens now? She managed. Now, Samuel said, wincing as he adjusted the bandage on his arm. We figure out what the hell your husband left you. They gathered the scattered papers from the yard, every last sheet, and spread them across Clara's kitchen table. In the daylight, the symbols made even less sense than they had before. Strings of numbers, letters that didn't form words, geometric shapes that might have been maps or might have been meaningless scribbles. It's definitely a cipher, Mason said, studying one of the pages through a magnifying glass. But I've never seen anything like this. It's not military code, not standard substitution. This is custom work. Thomas wasn't educated, Clara said. He barely finished primary school. How could he create something like this? Maybe he didn't. Samuel looked up from the page he was examining. Maybe someone taught him, someone who needed information kept secret. Elias paced the small kitchen, his jaw tight. Thomas was documenting Mercer's network, routes, contacts, money flows. If this really is a complete map of the operation, it's worth killing for. Hell, it's worth starting a war for. So we decrypt it, Clara said. Then we take it to the authorities. We can't decrypt it without the key, Mason pointed out. And your husband's dead. The key died with him. Not necessarily. Samuel tapped one of the pages. Look at this. These numbers here. They repeat. See? Every third line, same sequence. That's not random. That's a pattern. Clara leaned forward, squinting at the page. The numbers blurred together, meaningless to her untrained eye. What does it mean? It means there's a logic to it, which means it can be broken. Samuel looked at her. Did your husband have any books, journals, anything with writing in it? He had a Bible. He'd read from it sometimes. Get it. Clara went to the bedroom, moving on autopilot. Everything felt unreal, like she was moving through a dream. Thomas's Bible sat on the bedside table where it always had, leather-worn and water-stained. She brought it back to the kitchen and handed it to Samuel. He flipped through it quickly, scanning pages, then stopped. Here, look. Clara looked. Thomas had underlined passages throughout the book, which wasn't unusual. Lots of people marked their Bibles. But these marks were strange, random words underlined, seemingly without pattern or meaning. He wasn't marking verses, Samuel said. He was marking letters. Mason leaned in. Book cipher. Each number in the coded message corresponds to a word in the Bible. You use the first letter of each word to spell out the message. Clara stared at the underlined words, her mind racing. Thomas had sat right here, at this table, marking this Bible while she cooked dinner or mended clothes. She'd thought he was being devout. Instead, he'd been building a cipher key. How long will it take to decrypt everything? Elias asked. Days, Samuel said grimly. Maybe weeks. This is 40-some pages of encoded text. Even with the key, it's going to be slow work. We don't have days. Elias moved to the window, scanning the horizon. Mercer knows his men came here. When they don't report back, he'll send more. Probably already has. Then we run, Clara said. Take the papers and go somewhere safe. There's nowhere safe. Not as long as Mercer thinks you have something he wants. So what do we do? Just wait here to die? The silence that followed was answer enough. Clara looked around the table at these three men, strangers really, even Elias, and realized they were all thinking the same thing. They were trapped, outgunned, running out of time and options. We could burn it, she said quietly. Everyone looked at her. Burn the papers, Clara continued. All of them. If Mercer thinks the information is gone, he'll have no reason to come after us. He'll kill you anyway, Mason said bluntly. Just to be sure. He's going to kill me regardless. At least this way he gets nothing. No. Elias's voice was hard. We didn't come this far to destroy the one thing that can bring Mercer down. We came this far to survive. Your husband died for this information, Clara. He died trying to do the right thing. Are you really going to throw that away? The words hit her like a slap. Clara felt her face flush, anger rising. Don't you dare! Don't you dare use Thomas against me. He's dead because of this, and I won't— A sound outside cut her off. Horses. Multiple horses, moving fast. Mason was at the window in an instant. Riders, 6 of them, coming from the east. Elias cursed. How long? 2 minutes. Maybe less. Clara's stomach dropped. She looked at the papers spread across the table, at the Bible lying open, at these 3 men who'd tried to help her and were now going to die for it. The cellar, she said suddenly. We put the papers in the cellar, hide them. If they search the house and don't find anything, they'll torture it out of us, Samuel said, but he was already gathering papers. But it's better than nothing. Move. They worked frantically, shoving pages back into the leather satchel, Samuel stuffing the Bible in alongside them. Clara grabbed the satchel and ran for the barn, her heart in her throat. Behind her, she could hear Elias and Mason overturning furniture, making it look like the house had been ransacked. She made it to the cellar and threw the satchel down into the darkness, then pulled the grain sacks back over the door, trying to make it look undisturbed. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely manage it. The sound of horses in the yard made her freeze. Voices, shouting orders. Footsteps. Clara ran back toward the house, but she was too slow. The barn door slammed open, and two men entered, guns drawn. She skidded to a halt, throwing her hands up. "Don't move!" one of them shouted. Clara didn't move. They grabbed her roughly, shoving her toward the door. She stumbled, nearly fell, and one of them yanked her upright by her hair. Pain shot through her scalp, but she bit down on the cry. They dragged her into the yard where the others were already being held at gunpoint. Elias had blood running down his face from a fresh cut. Mason was on his knees, hands behind his head. Samuel sat in the mud, his wounded arm hanging useless at his side. A man on horseback surveyed the scene with cold satisfaction. He was older than the others, maybe 50, with silver hair and a face that might have been handsome once but now just looked cruel. He wore a fine coat despite the mud and rain, and his horse was better bred than any Clara had ever seen. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his voice smooth and cultured. "I'm Dalton Mercer. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Clara said nothing. Mercer dismounted with practiced ease and walked toward her, his boots squelching in the mud. Up close, she could see the intelligence in his eyes, the calculating coldness that marked him as far more dangerous than the men he employed. "Your husband stole from me," Mercer said conversationally. "Months of work, documenting things that were none of his business. I gave him a chance to return what he'd taken. He refused. So I arranged an accident." He paused, watching Clara's face. "You didn't know it was murder, did you? The fall. Very convenient, very tragic. No one questioned it." Clara's vision blurred with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. "Where is the map, Mrs. Whitmore?" "I don't know what you're talking about." Mercer sighed. "We already searched the trunk. The coded papers are gone." "Which means you hid them. Which means you know exactly what I'm talking about." He pulled a pistol from his coat, casual as anything. "Tell me where they are." "Go to hell." He backhanded her across the face with the pistol. Clara's head snapped to the side, pain exploding through her cheekbone. She tasted blood, felt her legs buckle. Someone caught her, one of Mercer's men, and held her upright. "Tell me," Mercer repeated. Through the pain and the ringing in her ears, Clara heard Elias shouting, struggling against the men holding him. She couldn't make out the words. Didn't matter anyway. "The barn," she gasped. "In the barn, under the floor." Mercer studied her face, looking for deception. Whatever he saw there satisfied him. He gestured to two of his men. "Check it. Tear the place apart if you have to." The men disappeared into the barn. Clara could hear them inside, moving things, throwing things, cursing. Minutes passed. Then one of them emerged, carrying the leather satchel. "Found it, boss. Cellar in the back corner." Mercer's smile widened. He took the satchel and opened it, pulling out the Bible and several pages of coded text. "Excellent. You see, Mrs. Whitmore, cooperation is so much easier than resistance." He handed the satchel to one of his men, then turned back to Clara. "Now, the cipher key. How do we read it?" Clara's mind raced. She could tell him about the Bible, about the marked passages. But then what? He'd have everything, and they'd all die anyway. Or she could lie, buy time, hope for a miracle that wasn't coming. "I don't know," she said. "Thomas never told me." Mercer's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went dead and flat. "Wrong answer." He raised the pistol and shot Samuel in the leg. The old man's scream tore through the air. He collapsed, clutching his thigh, blood pouring between his fingers. Mason lunged forward and was clubbed down by a rifle butt. Elias shouted something Clara couldn't hear over the ringing in her ears. "The key," Mercer said calmly, as if he hadn't just shot a man. "Tell me now, or the next one goes in his head." Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Samuel was writhing in the mud, his face gray with shock. And it was her fault, all her fault. "The Bible," she choked out. "The underlined words. They're the key." Mercer pulled the Bible from the satchel and flipped through it, his eyes scanning the marked passages. A slow smile spread across his face. "Book cipher. Clever. Your husband was smarter than he looked." He snapped the Bible shut and tucked it under his arm, then looked at his men. "Burn the house, the barn too. Leave no trace." "Wait," Clara started, but Mercer cut her off. "You've been very helpful, Mrs. Whitmore. Unfortunately, you're now a liability." He raised the pistol again, this time pointing it at her head. "Any last words?" Clara looked him in the eye, her fear burning away to leave only rage. "I hope it kills you." "What?" Whatever's in those papers. I hope it destroys everything you've built. I hope it ruins you. Mercer's smile faded. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by cold determination. Kill them all, he said to his men. Make it quick. The men raised their guns, and then the world exploded. The blast came from the direction of the road, a massive boom that shook the ground and sent a column of smoke skyward. Mercer's men spun toward the sound, confusion breaking their formation. What the hell? More explosions. Closer now. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, bullets ripping through Mercer's men. One dropped, then another. The rest dove for cover, returning fire blindly. Through the smoke and chaos, riders appeared, a dozen of them, maybe more, wearing marshal's badges and federal insignia. They hit Mercer's men like a hammer, overwhelming them through sheer numbers and surprise. Clara threw herself flat, covering her head as bullets whined overhead. Beside her, Elias was moving, somehow free of his captors, dragging Samuel toward the dubious cover of the water trough. Mason was up too, fighting hand-to-hand with one of Mercer's men. Someone grabbed Clara's arm. She lashed out instinctively, but the grip held firm. Easy. We're federal marshals. We're here to help. Clara looked up into the face of a woman in her 40s, hard-eyed and steady, a badge glinting on her chest. Can you walk? Yes? Then move. Now. The woman hauled Clara to her feet and half-dragged, half-carried her toward the fence line where other marshals were setting up a defensive position. Clara stumbled along, her mind unable to process what was happening. Where had they come from? How had they known? She risked a glance back and saw Mercer running for his horse, the satchel clutched in one hand, his pistol in the other. Two marshals moved to intercept him, but he shot them both, barely breaking stride. He's getting away, Clara shouted. But Elias had seen him too. He broke from cover, running in a low crouch, closing the distance between them. Mercer reached his horse and swung into the saddle, yanking the reins hard. The horse reared, hooves flashing. Elias tackled him. They hit the ground together, a tangle of limbs and violence. The satchel flew from Mercer's grip, spilling papers across the mud. Clara watched in horror as the two men fought, trading blows with brutal efficiency. Mercer was older but vicious, going for eyes and throat. Elias was faster, his movements trained and precise. Mercer's pistol came up. Elias grabbed his wrist, forcing the gun skyward. It fired once, the shot going wild. They struggled for control, muscles straining, faces inches apart. The gun fired again. Both men went still. For a long, terrible moment, Clara couldn't tell who'd been hit. Then Mercer slumped, blood spreading across his fine coat. Elias shoved him away and staggered to his feet, breathing hard. The gunfire was dying down now, sporadic shots rather than continuous roar. Clara looked around and saw Mercer's men either dead or surrendering, hands raised, weapons thrown aside. The marshals were everywhere, securing the scene, tending to wounded. It was over. Clara's legs gave out. She sat down hard in the mud, her whole body shaking. The female marshal crouched beside her, saying something, but Clara couldn't make out the words over the ringing in her ears. Elias appeared, covered in blood and mud, and dropped to his knees in front of her. Clara, look at me. Are you hurt? She shook her head, unable to speak. It's over, he said, his voice hoarse. You're safe, I swear. You're safe now. Clara looked past him at the burning barn, at the bodies in the yard, at her home turned into a battlefield. Safe. The word felt like a lie. But Elias was alive, Samuel was alive, being tended by a marshal with a medical kit. Mason was alive, nursing a split lip and what looked like a broken nose. And Mercer was dead, his blood soaking into the same mud that had swallowed so many others. Clara started to laugh. It came out broken, edged with hysteria, but she couldn't stop it. She laughed until she cried, and then she just cried. Great racking sobs that tore through her chest and left her empty. Elias held her through it all, his arms steady, his presence the only solid thing in a world that had tilted completely off its axis. When the tears finally stopped, Clara pulled back and wiped her face with shaking hands. The papers, she said. Mercer dropped them. We need... Already secured, the female marshal said. She'd been standing nearby, giving them space. We have everything, the coded documents, the Bible, all of it. Who are you? Deputy Marshal Catherine Wells. We've been investigating Mercer's organization for 18 months. When we heard about the forced marriage and the attack on the road, we knew something was breaking. We got here as fast as we could." She paused. "I'm sorry it wasn't faster." Clara looked at the dead men scattered across her yard, at the blood turning the mud black. "How did you find us?" "Samuel Hayes works for us. Has for years. He's been embedded in Mercer's network, gathering intelligence. When Elias contacted us about your husband's documents, we coordinated the operation." Wells gestured towards Samuel, who was sitting propped against the fence, his leg bandaged. "He's going to be fine, by the way. Clean through and through." Samuel raised a hand weakly, managing a pained smile. Clara wanted to go to him, to thank him, but her body wouldn't cooperate. She just sat there, numb and exhausted. "What happens now?" Elias asked. "Now we decrypt those documents and use them to dismantle Mercer's entire operation. Every contact, every route, every corrupt official. It's going to take time, but when we're done, we'll have cut the head off one of the biggest criminal enterprises west of the Mississippi." Wells looked at Clara. "Your husband's work is going to save a lot of lives, Mrs. Whitmore. He was a brave man." Clara didn't feel like Thomas had been brave. She felt like he'd been reckless and stupid, getting involved in things that had gotten him killed and nearly gotten her killed too. But she also understood in a distant way that he'd been trying to do something good, trying to make things right, even if it had cost him everything. "Can I go inside?" she asked. I just need a minute." Wells nodded. "Take your time. We'll be here a while yet." Clara stood on shaky legs and walked toward the house. The front door hung open, the interior ransacked from Mercer's search. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her, shutting out the chaos and noise. The house was a wreck. Furniture overturned, drawers emptied, her few possessions scattered and broken. But it was still her house, still standing, still home, despite everything. She sank into a chair at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd shared meals with Thomas, where she'd sat alone after he died, where just hours ago she'd watched strange men decode her husband's secrets. Her hands rested on the scarred wood, and she closed her eyes, trying to find some center of calm in the storm. The door opened quietly. Elias stepped inside, closing it behind him. "You okay?" he asked. "No." Clara opened her eyes. "But I'm alive. That's something." He pulled out a chair and sat across from her, wincing slightly. She noticed for the first time that he was favoring his left side, probably cracked ribs from the fight with Mercer. "You should have that looked at," she said. "Later." He was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes studying her face. "I'm sorry for all of it. If I'd moved faster, been smarter." "Don't." Clara held up a hand. "Just don't. I can't do guilt and what-ifs right now. We survived. That's enough." "Is it?" She didn't have an answer for that. They sat in silence, listening to the muffled sounds from outside. Voices, horses, the crackle of the barn fire being extinguished. The marshals were cleaning up, putting Clara's life back together in whatever form it could take after this. "What will you do?" Elias asked quietly. "After?" Clara looked around her ruined kitchen, at the life she'd built here with Thomas, at the farm she'd fought so hard to keep. It all felt impossibly distant now, like looking at someone else's memories. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Start over, I guess. Somewhere far from here." "You could rebuild. The farm's still yours, the debt's paid." "With blood." Clara's voice came out flat. "I can't stay here, Elias. Every time I look at that yard, I'll see—" She couldn't finish. He nodded, understanding. "Where will you go?" "West, maybe. Oregon. I've heard there's good land there. Fresh starts." She looked at him. "What about you?" "I go where the work takes me. Another case, another hunt." He paused. "Unless you need someone to go west with you." Clara's breath caught. She searched his face, looking for meaning behind the casual words. "Are you offering?" "I'm offering whatever you want. Partner, protector, husband, if you want to keep that legal fiction going." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Or I can disappear. Let you start that fresh start alone." She should have said yes to that. Should have cut ties, taken her second chance and run as far as she could from everything that had happened here. That would have been the smart choice, the safe choice. But Clara Whitmore was done with safe. "I think," she said slowly, "that I could use a partner. Someone who knows how to handle trouble when it comes calling. Trouble has a way of finding me, Elias warned. I noticed. Clara almost smiled. But I'm starting to think I can handle more than people gave me credit for. Yeah, Elias said softly. You really can. Outside, someone called for Elias. He stood, grimacing at the pain in his ribs. I should go. Wells will want statements from all of us. Elias? He stopped at the door, looking back. Thank you, Clara said, for everything. For the courthouse, for coming after me, for all of it. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. He held her gaze for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then he nodded and stepped back outside, leaving Clara alone with her thoughts. She sat at the table for a while longer, listening to her house settle around her, feeling the weight of everything that had happened pressing down. Thomas was dead. Her farm was a crime scene. She'd killed no one herself but had watched men die in her yard, had blood on her dress that would never wash out. But she was alive, and for the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, Clara felt like she'd earned the right to decide what came next. Not her father, not her husband, not a judge, or a debt collector, or a criminal with a gun, just her. She stood slowly, her body protesting every movement, and walked to the window. Outside, the marshals were loading bodies onto wagons, collecting evidence, beginning the long process of documentation that would follow. Elias stood with Wells, gesturing as he spoke, probably giving his account of the fight. Clara watched him for a moment, this stranger who'd walked into her life and turned it upside down. He'd lied about some things, she was sure, hidden others, but he'd also stood beside her when no one else would, had fought for her when he had no reason to. That had to count for something. The sun was trying to break through the clouds now, weak shafts of light turning the wet ground to silver. Clara pressed her hand to the cold glass and made herself a promise. She would survive this. She would heal. She would take whatever remained of her life and build something new from the wreckage. And she would never, ever let anyone make her feel small again. The marshals stayed for 3 days, turning Clara's farm into a temporary command post. They set up tents in the field, brought in wagons full of supplies, and worked around the clock decrypting Thomas's documents. Clara watched it all from a distance, helping where she could but mostly staying out of the way. On the second day, Wells came to her with a ledger they'd extracted from the coded pages. You should see this, the marshal said, spreading the book open on what remained of Clara's kitchen table. Your husband documented everything, shipment routes, payoff schedules, names of corrupt officials from here to St. Louis. There are judges on here, Clara, state legislators, people who are supposed to protect citizens, not prey on them. Clara stared at the careful handwriting, Thomas's handwriting, neat and methodical. How did he get all this? Best we can figure, Mercer hired him as a freight hauler about 18 months ago. Legitimate cover work, moving goods between towns. Thomas drove wagons, kept his head down, and nobody paid attention to him. But he was watching, taking notes, building this. Wells tapped the ledger. We're talking about a network that spans 6 states. Mercer wasn't just running local rackets. This was organized crime on a scale we haven't seen before. And Thomas was going to expose it. We think he contacted a federal prosecutor in Kansas City, made initial overtures about turning evidence, but someone leaked it back to Mercer before Thomas could get to safety. Wells's expression hardened. The well wasn't an accident. We found testimony from one of Mercer's men. He confessed before we even asked, trying to cut a deal. Said Mercer ordered the hit personally, made it look like bad luck. Clara's hands curled into fists. She'd known, on some level, but hearing it confirmed was different. Did Thomas know? Before it happened, did he know they were coming for him? There's a letter, found it tucked inside the Bible. Wells pulled a folded paper from her pocket and handed it over. It's addressed to you. Clara's fingers trembled as she unfolded it. The handwriting was rushed, messier than the careful cipher work, like Thomas had written it in a hurry. Clara, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. I'm sorry. Sorry for lying, sorry for the danger, sorry for everything I should have said and didn't. I got involved in something I couldn't walk away from, saw things that needed stopping. I thought I could fix it quiet, keep you safe by keeping you ignorant. I was wrong. The trunk has everything, proof of crimes, names, routes. If something happens to me, give it to the federal marshals. Trust no one local. Mercer owns too many of them. You deserve better than me, better than this mess. But you're stronger than you know, Clara. Stronger than I ever gave you credit for. I'm sorry I won't be there to see you prove it. Thomas Clara read it twice, then carefully folded it again. Her eyes were dry. She'd cried herself empty over the past 2 days, and now there was just a hollow ache where the tears used to be. He was trying to protect you, Wells said quietly. He was trying to get himself killed. He just succeeded. Clara set the letter down. What happens to the evidence now? We're making copies. One set goes to the federal prosecutor in Kansas City, another to Washington. We're also coordinating with territorial authorities to make mass arrests, simultaneously, across all 6 states. If we move fast enough, we can grab Mercer's entire network before they realize what's happening. How long? 2 weeks, maybe 3. Wells paused. We'll need you to testify eventually, at the trials. You're a witness to multiple crimes, and your connection to Thomas makes you valuable to the prosecution. Clara had expected this, but hearing it still made her stomach turn. I'll do it, whatever you need. It won't be easy. Defense attorneys will tear into you, try to make you look complicit or stupid or both. Let them try. Clara met Wells's eyes. I'm done being underestimated. Wells smiled, the first genuine warmth Clara had seen from the hard-edged Marshal. I believe you. For what it's worth, I think your husband would be proud of what you did, how you handled yourself. Not many people could have survived what you went through. After Wells left, Clara stood alone in her kitchen, looking at the letter. She should have felt something, grief, anger, betrayal. But all she felt was tired. Tired of secrets, tired of death, tired of living in the shadow of a man who'd chosen principles over survival and left her to clean up the mess. She took the letter outside and burned it in the yard, watching the paper curl and blacken. The words disappeared into ash and smoke, and Clara felt no guilt about erasing them. Thomas's apology didn't change anything, didn't bring him back, didn't undo the damage, didn't make the nightmares stop. But maybe, eventually, it would be enough to let her forgive him. Elias found her there, standing in the mud with smoke drifting around her feet. You okay? He asked. Clara almost laughed. He kept asking that, and she kept not having a real answer. Wells says they need me to testify. In 3 weeks, maybe. You gonna do it? Yes. She turned to face him. What about you? Where will you be in 3 weeks? Depends. On what? On whether you still want company heading west. Clara studied his face, looking for signs of obligation or pity. She didn't find any. Just honest curiosity, and maybe something else she couldn't quite name. You don't owe me anything, she said. The marriage was a legal fiction, remember? You said so yourself. Once the trials are over, we can dissolve it. Go our separate ways. That what you want? I'm asking what you want. Elias was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes distant. I've been alone a long time, moving from job to job, town to town, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. It's a hard way to live. So stop. It's not that simple. Why not? He gestured vaguely at the farm, at the evidence of violence that still marked the property. Because this follows me. Danger, chaos, people trying to kill me. I don't want to drag you into that. Little late for that, Clara said dryly. I've already been shot at, kidnapped, and nearly murdered. Twice. Your danger and mine are pretty well tangled up at this point. It'll get worse. Mercer had enemies, partners. When word gets out that we took him down, some of those people are going to come looking for payback. Then we handle it, together. Clara stepped closer. I'm not some fragile thing that needs protecting, Elias. I prove that. And I'm not asking you to stay out of some romantic notion or because I need a man to complete me. I'm asking because I think we work well together, and because I'm tired of being alone. Elias looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. You sure about this? No, but I'm doing it anyway. The corner of his mouth quirked up in what might have been a smile. All right then. Partners. Partners, Clara agreed. They shook on it, a formal gesture that felt absurdly businesslike given everything they'd been through, but it also felt right somehow. A new beginning built on honesty instead of desperation. The next morning, Samuel hobbled over to the house on a crutch, his wounded leg bandaged but healing. He looked pale and tired, but his eyes were sharp as ever. Heard you're testifying, he said, settling heavily into a chair. Word travels fast. This is a small operation. Everything travels fast. He accepted the coffee Clara poured for him, wrapping his hands around the cup. I wanted to thank you for not breaking when Mercer shot me. That took guts. Clara shook her head. I told him what he wanted to know, gave up the cipher key. After holding out as long as you could, long enough for the cavalry to arrive. Samuel took a careful sip. That's all anyone can ask for. You almost died. I've almost died before. Comes with the job. He shifted his leg, wincing. Point is, you kept your head, made smart choices under pressure. That's rare. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and refilled her own cup. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the activity outside as marshals packed up equipment and prepared to move out. What will you do after the trials? Samuel asked eventually. Head west. Oregon, probably. Start over. Good land out there. Hard work, but good. He paused. Elias going with you? That's the plan. Samuel nodded slowly, a knowing look in his eyes. He's a good man, complicated, got more baggage than a freight train, but good. You could do worse. I have done worse, Clara said quietly. Thomas wasn't bad, just in over his head. Same thing in the end. Samuel didn't argue with that. He finished his coffee and stood, testing his weight on the wounded leg. I'll be heading back to Kansas City once we wrap up here, but if you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you send word. I owe you that much. You don't owe me anything. Yeah, I do. You kept fighting when most people would have given up. That saved lives, Clara. Mine included. He tipped his hat to her. Take care of yourself out there. After he left, Clara went upstairs to pack. She didn't have much. A few dresses, some undergarments, a coat that had belonged to her mother. Everything else could stay. Let the bank sell it off, let some other family move into this house, and make new memories untainted by blood and violence. She was folding the last dress when she heard boots on the stairs. Elias appeared in the doorway, holding a small wooden box. Found this in the barn, he said. Thought you might want it. Clara took the box and opened it. Inside were her mother's wedding ring, a silver locket that had belonged to her grandmother, and a small cameo brooch. Things she'd thought lost in the chaos. Thank you, she said, her throat tight. There's something else. Elias pulled a folded map from his pocket. Been talking with Wells about routes west. If we leave in the next week, we can join up with a wagon train heading to Oregon. Safety in numbers. What about the trials? They won't start for at least a month. We testify, then we go. Wells says they can coordinate our testimony with the prosecutors, make sure we're not stuck waiting around. Clara studied the map, tracing the route with her finger. Nebraska to Wyoming, Wyoming to Idaho, Idaho to Oregon, thousands of miles through territory she'd never seen, toward a future she couldn't imagine. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something close to excitement. When do we leave? She asked. 3 days. That enough time? More than enough. I don't exactly have a lot to pack. That night, Clara stood in the doorway of the house one last time, looking at the empty rooms. The marshals had taken the furniture for evidence, and what remained looked skeletal in the fading light. Ghosts lived here now. Thomas's ghost. The ghosts of the men who died in the yard. The ghost of the woman Clara used to be. She closed the door and didn't look back. The wagon train assembled outside a small town called Kearney, about 60 miles west of Clara's farm. 15 wagons in all, carrying families and dreamers and people running from various pasts. Clara and Elias joined with a wagon purchased in town, small but sturdy, pulled by 2 horses that looked like they might actually survive the journey. They loaded supplies under the watchful eye of the wagon master, a grizzled man named Carson, who'd made the trip 7 times and had the scars to prove it. You 2 married? He asked, looking between Clara and Elias. Yes, Elias said smoothly. Carson grunted. Good. Don't need any scandals. Got enough trouble keeping folks alive without worrying about morality. He handed Elias a list. Need all of this before we leave. No exceptions. Trail's hard enough without people running short on supplies. They spent 2 days gathering everything on the list. Flour, salt, bacon, dried beans, coffee, tools, spare wagon parts, ammunition. Clara watched the costs pile up, wincing at each purchase, but Elias paid without complaint. The money from the bank in Kansas City had apparently been real, which raised questions Clara hadn't yet asked. On the third day, they met the other families. Most were polite but distant, clearly curious about the newcomers, but not curious enough to pry. One woman, a widow named Sarah with 3 young children, was friendlier than the rest. "First time west?" she asked Clara while their men discussed wagon repairs. "First time anywhere, really. I've never been more than a day's ride from where I was born." "Me neither. Well, until my husband died and left me nothing but debt and these 3. Sarah gestured at her children, currently chasing each other around the wagons. "Figured I'd take my chances in Oregon. Heard they need teachers out there, and I can read and write well enough." "You're braver than I am," Clara said. Sarah laughed. "Brave or desperate, hard to tell the difference sometimes." She lowered her voice. "Your husband seems capable." "That's good. You'll need capable on this trip." Clara glanced at Elias, who was helping another man reinforce a wagon wheel. "He is that. Handsome too, if you don't mind me saying." Clara felt her face heat. "I suppose." "Oh, you suppose?" Sarah grinned. "Well, whatever you suppose, hold on to him. Good men are rare, and the trail has a way of testing everything." They left at dawn on a cool morning in late spring, the wagons rolling out in a long line that stretched across the prairie. Clara sat beside Elias on the driver's bench, watching the town disappear behind them. This was it, the point of no return. Everything she'd known, everyone she'd been, fading into the distance. "Regrets?" Elias asked quietly. Clara thought about it honestly. "No." "You?" "Not yet." The first week was harder than Clara had expected. The constant motion of the wagon left her bruised and sore, her back aching from the rough bench. Dust got into everything, her clothes, her hair, her food. At night, she collapsed onto the bedroll too exhausted to even eat properly. But she didn't complain. Neither did anyone else. Complaining was pointless when everyone was suffering equally. They crossed into Wyoming on the 10th day, the landscape changing from flat prairie to rolling hills. The wagon train followed the Platte River, the water brown and sluggish but essential. Clara learned to make coffee with river water that tasted like mud, to cook over fires that never quite got hot enough, to sleep through storms that turned the ground into a swamp. She also learned things about Elias, small things, revealed in the quiet moments between crisis and chaos. He'd grown up in Missouri, lost his family to cholera when he was 15, spent years drifting before finding work with federal marshals. He was good with horses, better with guns, and could read people the way Clara read weather, subtle shifts in posture and expression that told him everything he needed to know. "You ever think about settling down before?" she asked one night while they sat by the fire. "Before all this?" "Once, long time ago. There was a woman in St. Louis. We talked about marriage, about building something permanent." He stared into the flames. "She died in a robbery. Wrong place, wrong time. After that, I stopped thinking about permanent things." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was 10 years ago. Different life." He glanced at her. "What about you? You and Thomas, was it good? Before everything went wrong?" Clara considered lying, painting a prettier picture. But Elias deserved honesty. "It was fine. Not bad, not great, just fine. Thomas was kind but distant. We shared a house and a bed, but I don't think we ever really knew each other. Not the way married people should." "You want different this time?" "This time isn't real, remember? Legal fiction." "Doesn't mean it can't become real, if we wanted." Clara's heart skipped. She looked at him across the fire, his face half-shadowed, and realized she did want it to be real. Wanted to build something with this complicated, dangerous man who'd saved her life more than once. "Maybe," she said carefully. "Let's survive the journey first, then we'll see." Elias smiled. "Deal." The trouble started in the third week, just past a place called Independence Rock. Clara was walking alongside the wagon, giving the horses a break from her weight, when she heard shouting from the front of the line. Carson was arguing with someone, a group of men on horseback who'd appeared from nowhere. Clara couldn't make out the words, but the tension was obvious. "Stay here," Elias said, climbing down from the wagon. "Like hell." Clara followed him toward the confrontation, ignoring his look of exasperation. The riders were rough-looking, armed, with the kind of casual arrogance that came from knowing nobody would challenge them. Their leader was a tall man with a pockmarked face and dead eyes. "Toll road," he was saying to Carson. $10 per wagon. Pay up or turn around." "This isn't a toll road," Carson said flatly. "This is open territory. You got no authority here." "I got 6 guns. That's authority enough." Several of the men from the wagon train had gathered now, forming a loose circle. The tension was thick enough to cut. Clara saw Sarah pulling her children behind a wagon, saw other families doing the same. "We're not paying," Carson said. The pockmarked man smiled. "Then we got a problem." "No," Elias said, stepping forward. "You got a problem." The pockmarked man's attention shifted to Elias, sizing him up. "That right? 6 guns against 20 wagons. You do the math. Most of these wagons are women and children." "Most, not all." Elias's hand rested casually on his belt, near his holster. "And I guarantee some of these women shoot better than your boys." The pockmarked man's smile faded. He looked around, reassessing. Several of the men from the wagon train were armed now, rifles held ready. Even Sarah had produced a shotgun from somewhere, holding it with surprising confidence. "This ain't worth dying over," one of the riders muttered. The pockmarked man spat into the dirt. "Next time," he said to Elias. Then to his men, "Let's go." They rode off, kicking up dust. Nobody relaxed until they were out of sight. Carson turned to Elias. "Appreciate the backup. We're all in this together." That night the mood in camp was subdued. People whispered about what might have happened, about whether the riders would come back with reinforcements. Claire helped Sarah cook dinner for both families, the children quieter than usual. "That was close," Sarah said, stirring a pot of beans. "Yeah. Your husband handled it well. Didn't back down, but didn't escalate either. That's smart." Clara nodded, watching Elias across the camp. He was talking with Carson and some of the other men, probably discussing security measures. Even here, thousands of miles from Nebraska, trouble found them. "Does it bother you?" Sarah asked. "The danger?" "I used to think it would. Now I'm just used to it, I guess." "You're stronger than you look, Clara Whitmore." Clara almost corrected her, almost said Crow, because that was technically her name now. But she didn't. Let people think what they wanted. Names were just words anyway. The wagon train pushed west through Wyoming and into Idaho, following trails worn deep by thousands of previous travelers. They lost a wagon to a river crossing, the current stronger than expected, sweeping it away despite everyone's best efforts. The family survived, clinging to other wagons, but they lost everything they owned. Clara gave them what she could spare: a blanket, some food, a dress that barely fit but was better than nothing. It wasn't much, but it was something. They buried a child outside Fort Hall, a little boy who'd caught fever and didn't recover. Clara stood with the other women while the father dug the grave, her throat tight with grief for a child she'd barely known. This was the price of chasing dreams. Not everyone made it, but most did. The wagon train kept moving, kept surviving, kept pushing toward Oregon and whatever waited there. Clara grew stronger on the journey, her body adapting to the physical demands, her mind sharpening with each new challenge. She learned to shoot, Elias teaching her with patient persistence. She learned to drive the wagon when he was sick with dysentery for 3 days. She learned to haggle with traders at the forts they passed, to stretch supplies when food ran short, to treat minor injuries and illnesses with the limited medicine they carried. By the time they crossed into Oregon, Clara barely recognized the woman she'd been in that Nebraska courtroom. That woman had been scared, uncertain, desperate. This woman was harder, more confident, marked by scars both visible and not. The wagon train dissolved at the Dalles, families splitting off toward different destinations. Sarah headed north toward Portland with her children, promising to write if she ever learned where Clara settled. Others went south or east or stayed right there. Clara and Elias bought land near the Willamette Valley, 160 acres of timber and river access. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, clean, untainted by death. They built a small cabin together, working side by side through the summer. It was hard work, brutal work, but also satisfying in a way Clara's old farm had never been. This was hers. Built with her own hands, no inheritance or marriage or debt hanging over it. On a warm evening in September, with the cabin's walls up and the roof nearly finished, Elias asked the question Clara had been expecting for weeks. The trials start next month. We should head back soon. Clara set down the hammer she'd been using. I know. You're ready for that? No, but I'll do it anyway. They traveled back east by stage, a faster but less comfortable journey than the wagon train had been. Clara watched the landscape roll past in reverse, Oregon to Idaho, Idaho to Wyoming, Wyoming back to Nebraska, and felt like she was moving backward through time. The trials were held in Omaha, in a courthouse much larger than the one where Clara had been married. She testified for 3 days, answering questions from prosecutors and enduring attacks from defense attorneys who called her a liar, a conspirator, a woman scorned making up stories about a dead husband. Clara held her ground. She told the truth, simple and unembellished, and let the evidence speak for itself. 37 people were convicted. Judges, officials, gang members, corrupt lawmen. Some went to prison. Others were hanged. The network Thomas had documented was destroyed, scattered to the winds. Clara watched it all with grim satisfaction. It didn't bring Thomas back, didn't undo the damage, but it was something. Justice, imperfect and incomplete, but real. When it was over, she and Elias stood on the courthouse steps in the cool autumn air, watching people hurry past on their way to ordinary lives. It's done, Elias said. Yeah, it is. Clara took a deep breath, tasting freedom. Let's go home. Oregon? Oregon. They headed west again, following the same trail they'd taken months before. The landscape was different now, autumn colors replacing summer green, the air sharp with approaching winter. They'd have to move fast to make it back before the passes closed. But Clara wasn't worried. They'd survived worse than weather, survived violence and betrayal and trials that tested everything they were. They could survive anything. Halfway across Wyoming, in a small town called South Pass, Elias stopped the wagon outside a church. What are we doing? Clara asked. Getting married. For real this time. Clara stared at him. What? The courthouse marriage was legal fiction. You said so yourself, but I don't want fiction anymore. I want real. He turned to face her fully. I want you, Clara. For better or worse, as an actual partner in an actual marriage. If you'll have me. Clara's heart was pounding. This is insane. We barely know each other. We've been through more together than most couples experience in a lifetime. I know you're strong, brave, stubborn as hell. I know you don't quit when things get hard. I know you saved my life at least twice, and I know I'd trust you with it again without hesitation. He paused. That's enough for me. Is it enough for you? Clara thought about everything they'd survived, everything they'd built, thought about the cabin waiting for them in Oregon, about the life they could make together if they stopped pretending it was temporary. Yes, she said. It's enough. They married in the church with the local minister, and 2 strangers pulled in off the street as witnesses. No guests, no ceremony, just vows spoken honestly, and a ring Elias had apparently been carrying since Kansas City. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Elias kissed her, gentle and careful, like she was something precious. Clara kissed him back, and it felt like coming home. They made it to Oregon 3 weeks before the first snow, settling into the cabin just as winter closed in around them. Clara spent those long, dark months learning to live with another person again, learning Elias's rhythms and habits, learning to share space and decisions and future plans. It wasn't always easy. They fought sometimes, sharp arguments born of exhaustion and stress, and 2 strong wills colliding. But they also laughed, worked side by side, built something solid and real from the wreckage of their pasts. By spring, Clara was pregnant. By summer, they'd expanded the cabin and cleared more land. By the following winter, they had a daughter, small and loud and perfect in all the ways that mattered. Clara named her Sarah, after the friend from the wagon train who'd shown to her that strength came in many forms. Life wasn't easy. Money was tight, work was hard, and there were days when Clara wondered if they'd made a terrible mistake coming west. But those moments passed, replaced by better ones, small victories that added up to something larger. She'd survived. More than survived. She'd prevailed. Had taken the worst life could throw at her and come out the other side changed but unbroken. Standing in the doorway of her cabin, watching Elias play with their daughter while the Oregon sun set behind the mountains, Clara finally understood what Thomas had been trying to tell her in that letter. She was stronger than anyone knew, stronger than anyone had given her credit for. But most importantly, she'd finally learned it herself. The peace lasted 18 months. Clara was in the garden when the riders came, her hands deep in soil, pulling weeds from around the potato plants. Little Sarah was nearby, playing with wooden blocks Elias had carved, her toddler babble a constant background music to the morning. The sun was warm on Clara's back, and for a moment, just a moment, everything felt safe. Then she heard the horses. Clara's head snapped up, 3 riders cresting the ridge above their property, moving slow and deliberate. Not neighbors. Neighbors didn't approach like that, careful and calculated. These men moved like they were hunting. Sarah, inside. Clara kept her voice calm, didn't run, didn't show fear, just stood slowly and picked up her daughter. Right now, sweetheart. She walked to the cabin, fighting the urge to sprint. Behind her, she could hear the horses getting closer. Elias was in the barn repairing a harness, too far away to reach quickly. Clara got Sarah inside, set her in the corner with her blocks. Stay here. Don't come out, no matter what you hear. Sarah's eyes went wide, picking up on her mother's fear. Mama? It's okay, baby. Just stay. Clara grabbed the rifle from above the door, checked the load, then stepped back outside. The riders had stopped in the yard, still mounted. The one in the center was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and a face that had seen too much sun. He wore expensive clothes gone dusty from travel, and his eyes were cold as creek water in January. Mrs. Crow, he said, like they were old friends. Clara raised the rifle, not pointing it directly, but making it clear she could. You're on private property. State your business or leave. My name is Gerard Whitlock. I was an associate of Dalton Mercer's. I believe you remember him. Clara's blood went cold. Get off my land. In a moment. First, we need to talk about the damage you and your husband caused. Whitlock dismounted slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. 37 convictions. Half my business contacts gone. Operations that took years to build, destroyed in a matter of months. That's what happens when you break the law. Whitlock smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The law is flexible, Mrs. Crow. Depends on who's enforcing it. Unfortunately, your late husband didn't understand that. Neither did Mercer in the end. They both paid for their mistakes. Clara's finger moved to the trigger. You threatening me? I'm explaining consequences. You see, when Mercer's network collapsed, certain individuals lost substantial sums of money, investments, if you will. Those individuals would like restitution. I don't have any money. No, but you have something more valuable. Whitlock gestured to the land around them. You have information. Your husband's documents didn't capture everything. There are still operations running, still people involved who weren't named. We need to know what else he documented, what he might have shared before he died. Thomas is dead. Whatever he knew died with him. Did it? Whitlock took a step closer. Or did he share it with his wife? Perhaps encode more information she hasn't revealed yet. The federal marshals were very thorough with what you gave them, but I wonder if there's more, hidden away, waiting to cause further damage. Clara's hands were steady on the rifle, but her heart was racing. There's nothing. I gave them everything. Forgive me if I don't take your word for it. Whitlock nodded to one of his men, who started dismounting. We're going to search your property. If we find nothing, we'll leave peacefully. If we find you've been lying, well, that would be unfortunate. The barn door opened. Elias stepped out, and Clara saw he had his pistol drawn, held low against his leg. He'd been listening. Nobody's searching anything, he said quietly. Whitlock's men tensed, hands moving toward weapons. The yard went silent except for the wind through the trees and Sarah's faint crying from inside the cabin. Mr. Crow, I was hoping we could keep this civilized. Then you should have sent a letter instead of showing up with hired guns. These men are my associates. They're killers. I can tell from here. Elias moved closer, his gait easy, but his eyes locked on Whitlock. You got 5 seconds to get back on those horses and ride out. After that, people start dying. There are 3 of us, Mr. Crow. Only one of you. 2, Clara said, raising the rifle to her shoulder. And I guarantee I'm a better shot than your boys. For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension stretched like a wire pulled too tight, one wrong word away from snapping. Clara could see Whitlock calculating, weighing his options. He hadn't expected resistance, had probably thought they'd be easy to intimidate, isolated out here with no law for 50 miles. He'd thought wrong. This doesn't end here, Whitlock said finally. You've made powerful enemies, Mrs. Crow. Enemies with long memories. Get in line, Clara said flatly. I've buried better men than you. Whitlock's face darkened. He remounted his horse, jerking the reins harder than necessary. We'll be back, with more men. You can't watch your property every hour of every day. Maybe not, but I can shoot 3 men before they clear this yard. Clara's voice was ice. Try me. They left, riding hard back toward the ridge. Clara didn't lower the rifle until they were out of sight, and even then she kept it close. Elias came to stand beside her, his jaw tight. They'll come back, he said. I know. We can't fight them off forever. Not if they bring enough men. Clara looked at the cabin, at the land they'd worked so hard to build, at everything they'd created from nothing. The thought of abandoning it made her sick, but the thought of Sarah caught in crossfire made her sicker. What do we do? She asked quietly. Elias was silent for a long moment. We finish it, once and for all. That night, after Sarah was asleep, they sat at the table making plans. Elias had contacts from his marshal days, people who owed him favors. Clara had the network of families from the wagon train, scattered across Oregon, but still in touch through occasional letters. Between them, they could maybe assemble enough support to make a stand. Or, Elias said, we take the fight to them. Clara looked up from the map they'd been studying. What? Whitlock's running what's left of Mercer's operation, which means he's based somewhere, probably Kansas City or Omaha. He's got records, money, leverage on corrupt officials. If we can get to those, we can finish what Thomas started. That's insane. We have a daughter, Elias. We can't hide either. They know where we live. They'll keep coming until we're dead or broken. He reached across the table, taking her hand. I'm not saying it's not dangerous. I'm saying it might be our only option. Clara wanted to argue, to find another way. But deep down, she knew he was right. Men like Whitlock didn't stop. They pushed and pushed until you either pushed back or got buried. Sarah, she said quietly, we can't take her with us. No, we send her somewhere safe. Sarah from the wagon train. She's in Portland now teaching school. She'd take our Sarah for a few weeks, keep her protected. Clara's throat tightened at the thought of being separated from her daughter, but she nodded. How do we even start? We don't know where Whitlock is based, don't know his operation. We know someone who does. Elias pulled a letter from his pocket, worn from being carried. Samuel Hayes, he sent this 3 months ago, said some of Mercer's old network was reorganizing. He's been tracking it, gathering evidence. If anyone knows where Whitlock operates, it's him. Samuel's in Kansas City. Yeah, 2 weeks travel, maybe less if we push hard. Clara looked at the letter, at Elias, at the cabin walls that suddenly felt less like protection and more like a cage. They'd built this life to escape violence, to find peace, but peace wasn't something you found. It was something you fought for, again and again, as many times as necessary. All right, she said. We go to Kansas City, we find Whitlock, and we end this. They left 2 days later after sending Sarah to Portland with a trusted neighbor making the trip anyway. Clara held her daughter tight at the parting, breathing in her smell, memorizing the weight of her in her arms. Be good for Miss Sarah, she whispered. Mama and Papa will come get you soon. Promise? The little girl's voice was so small, so trusting. Promise, baby, I promise. Watching the wagon roll away with her daughter inside was the hardest thing Clara had ever done. Harder than the courthouse, harder than the gunfights, harder than anything. Elias stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, and neither of them spoke until the wagon was out of sight. The journey east was faster than the wagon train had been, but no less grueling. They traveled by stage where they could, horseback where they couldn't, pushing hard and sleeping little. Clara felt like she was moving backward through time again, retracing steps she'd hoped never to take. Kansas City had grown since the trials, sprawling and loud and full of people who didn't care about one woman's problems. They found Samuel in a boarding house near the stockyards, looking older and more tired than Clara remembered. Wondered when you'd show up, he said by way of greeting. Heard Whitlock paid you a visit. News travels fast. Bad news always does. Samuel gestured them inside, his legs still favoring the side where Mercer's man had shot him. Coffee's terrible, but it's hot. They sat in his cramped room while he spread papers across a table that had seen better days. Maps, ledgers, photographs of men Clara didn't recognize. Whitlock's smart, Samuel said. Smarter than Mercer was. He learned from what happened, compartmentalized his operation. Nobody knows the full picture except him. Where's he based? Elias asked. Moves around, but he keeps an office in Omaha, legitimate business front, import-export company. Real work happens in the basement. Meetings, record-keeping, all of it. Samuel tapped a photograph. This building, 3rd and Douglas Street. Clara studied the image. 3-story brick building, corner location, multiple entrances. That's heavily trafficked area. We can't just walk in shooting. No, but you could walk in as customers. Samuel pulled out another document. Whitlock's company deals in farm equipment. You're farmers from Oregon, in town to purchase new machinery. Get you in the door. Then what? Clara asked. We can't exactly rob the place in broad daylight. You don't rob it, you document it. Samuel looked between them. Same thing Thomas did. You get in, photograph the records, get out. Then we take the evidence to federal prosecutors and let the law handle it. The law didn't stop Mercer from killing Thomas, Claire said flatly. No, but it stopped Mercer eventually, and it'll stop Whitlock too if we do this right. Elias was quiet, studying the maps. Security? 4 men on rotation, 2 on the main floor during business hours, 2 in the basement where the real work happens. At night, it drops to 2 total. Samuel paused. There's a window. Every Thursday, Whitlock meets with his lieutenants, all the big players in one room. If you could get evidence during that meeting, names, faces, conversations, it would be enough to dismantle the whole operation. This Thursday, Clara asked. Next Thursday. Gives you 6 days to prepare. They spent those 6 days learning everything they could about Whitlock's operation. Samuel had built an impressive network of informants, clerks, dock workers, people who saw things and talked for the right price. Clara and Elias memorized guard rotations, floor plans, escape routes. On Wednesday night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in the boarding house bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Sarah safe in Portland and all the ways this could go wrong. You don't have to do this, Elias said quietly in the darkness. I can handle it alone. No, you can't. You need someone on the outside watching for trouble. Clara, I'm not staying behind Elias. This is my fight as much as yours. More, maybe. Thomas was my husband. The debt, the forced marriage, all of it. That was mine to carry. She rolled over to face him. I'm finishing it. You're the bravest person I've ever met. You know that? I'm terrified. I know. That's what makes it brave. Thursday morning came too fast. Clara dressed in her best clothes, a dress purchased just for this, professional and forgettable. She and Elias looked like any other farm couple in the city on business. Respectable. Harmless. The walk to 3rd and Douglas felt like walking to an execution. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, her hands clammy despite the cool morning air. Beside her, Elias looked calm, but she knew him well enough now to see the tension in his shoulders. The building was exactly as the photographs had shown. Brick, solid, people streaming in and out on morning business. Clara and Elias entered through the front door, nodding to the guard who barely glanced at them. The main floor was legitimate business. Clerks processing orders, customers examining equipment catalogs. Elias approached the front desk while Clara drifted toward the back, scanning for the basement entrance Samuel had described. There. A door marked private, employees only. One guard standing nearby, looking bored. Clara moved past without stopping, making mental notes. The guard was armed, but not particularly alert. The door had a simple lock, nothing complex. The real challenge would be the basement itself. Can I help you, ma'am? A clerk appeared at her elbow. Clara smiled. Just waiting for my husband. He's inquiring about purchasing new plows. Of course. Can I offer you some coffee while you wait? That would be lovely. The clerk disappeared and Clara continued her reconnaissance. 2 guards on the main floor, both positioned near entrances. No clear line of sight to the basement door from either position. That was something. Elias rejoined her, carrying pamphlets. They're setting up an appointment for next week to discuss equipment needs. Perfect. Clara took his arm, and they left the building, walking casually down the street like they had all the time in the world. 2 blocks away, in an alley Samuel had designated as a meeting point, they stopped. "Doable," Elias said. "Tight, but doable. We go in tonight, after closing. Samuel's contact will leave the back door unlocked." "What about the guards?" "Samuel's handling it. Whiskey in their coffee, enough to make them drowsy, but not enough to raise suspicion." Clara wanted to protest, to say it was too risky, too many variables, but she'd learned over the past 2 years that every plan had risks. You just had to decide which ones you could live with. That night, they entered through the back door at midnight. The building was dark, except for a single lamp in the front office, where one guard sat, head nodding over a newspaper. Elias moved like smoke, silent and quick, Clara following in his wake. The basement door was unlocked, just as promised. They descended into darkness, Elias lighting a small covered lantern that gave just enough light to see by. The basement was larger than Clara expected, lined with filing cabinets and lockboxes. "You take the left side, I'll take the right," Elias whispered. "Photographs of anything with names or numbers. 10 minutes? No more." They worked in synchronized silence, Clara using the small camera Samuel had provided. She photographed ledgers, correspondence, maps with routes marked. Her hands were shaking, making it hard to hold the camera steady, but she forced them still. Voices overhead made her freeze. Footsteps on the floor above, moving toward the basement door. Elias grabbed her arm, pulling her behind a filing cabinet. They pressed into the shadows just as the door opened and light flooded down the stairs. 2 men descended, neither of them guards. One was Whitlock himself, older but unmistakable. The other Clara didn't recognize. "Can't afford loose ends," Whitlock was saying. "The Crow woman and her husband need to be dealt with, permanently." Clara's breath caught. Elias's hand found hers, squeezing once in warning. "Don't move, don't breathe." "They're in Oregon," the other man said. "That's a long way to send men." "Then we make them come to us, threaten the child. Parents always respond to threats against their children." Clara's vision went red. She started to move, but Elias held her back, his grip iron tight. His eyes in the dim light said everything his mouth couldn't. "Wait, not yet. We need evidence." Whitlock moved to one of the filing cabinets, pulling out a ledger. "The shipment from St. Louis arrives next week. Once we move that, we'll have enough capital to expand into Colorado. The governor there is amenable to arrangements." "What about the federal marshals?" "Most of the competent ones are busy cleaning up the last mess. By the time they notice us, we'll be too entrenched to root out." Whitlock closed the ledger. "This is why I survived when Mercer didn't. Patience, planning, and knowing which battles to fight." They talked for another 5 minutes, discussing routes and payoffs and people who needed to be eliminated. Clara memorized every word, every name, every detail. This was it, the evidence they needed. Finally, Whitlock and his associate left, climbing back up the stairs and closing the door. Clara and Elias remained frozen for a full minute, listening to the footsteps fade. "Did you get that?" Elias whispered. Clara held up the camera. "Every word in these photographs. It's enough." They finished quickly, photographing the ledger Whitlock had referenced, then made their way back upstairs. The guard was fully asleep now, snoring softly. They slipped out the back door and into the night. Samuel was waiting in the safe house, along with Deputy Marshal Catherine Wells and 3 other federal agents. Clara had sent word the moment they'd confirmed Whitlock's meeting, and Wells had come personally. "Tell me everything," Wells said. They did. Every word of Whitlock's conversation, every document they'd photographed, every detail of the basement layout. Wells listened with increasing satisfaction, her hard face finally showing something like a smile. "This is good. Better than good. With this and Samuel's existing evidence, we can move on the entire network. Tonight." "Tonight?" Clara asked. "We've been building a case for months, but we needed something concrete. This gives us probable cause for raids across 4 states. We hit them all simultaneously before they can warn each other." Wells looked at Clara and Elias. "You two did good work, but you need to disappear now. Whitlock has people everywhere, and when this goes down, he'll know who to blame." "We're not leaving until it's finished," Clara said. "This isn't a request, Mrs. Crow. It's an order. You've done your part. Let us do ours." Elias took Clara's hand. "She's right. We need to get back to Sarah." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to see Whitlock arrested personally, but Sarah was more important than vengeance. She always had been. "All right," she said quietly. "We'll go." They left Kansas City that night, heading west on the fastest stage they could find. Behind them, federal marshals were mobilizing, preparing for coordinated raids that would happen at dawn. Clara watched the city disappear in the darkness and felt the weight of 2 years finally starting to lift. The raids made newspapers across the country. 32 arrests in one night, operations spanning 6 states completely dismantled. Whitlock himself was captured in Omaha, trying to flee with 2 suitcases full of money and ledgers. The evidence Clara and Elias had gathered, combined with Samuel's years of work, created an airtight case. The trials took months. Clara testified again, this time with less fear and more anger. She looked Whitlock in the eye as she recounted his threats against her daughter, his plans to expand his criminal empire, his complete lack of remorse for the lives he'd destroyed. The jury convicted him in less than an hour. Standing on the courthouse steps after the verdict, Clara felt something shift inside her. Not relief exactly. She'd learned that relief was temporary, that danger could always return, but something like closure. A chapter finally, definitively ended. "It's over," Elias said beside her. "Is it?" Clara looked at him. "Is it really ever over?" "Maybe not, but we've done what we can. Stopped 2 major criminal organizations, put away people who needed putting away. Thomas's work is finished. Our work is finished." Clara thought about that. Thomas's work. For so long, she'd resented what he'd started, the danger he'd brought into her life. But standing here now, seeing justice served, she understood. He'd been trying to make things right. The method had been flawed, the execution imperfect, but the intention had been good. "Yeah," she said quietly. "It's finished." They collected Sarah from Portland a week later. The little girl launched herself into Clara's arms, chattering about everything she'd done and seen. Clara held her tight, breathing in her smell, feeling the fierce protective love that had driven every decision over the past 2 years. This was what mattered, not revenge, not justice, not even closure. Just this, her daughter, safe and happy and whole. The journey back to Oregon felt different than the journey out. Lighter somehow, despite everything that had happened. Clara watched the landscape roll past and felt like she was finally moving forward instead of running from something. Their farm was exactly as they'd left it, the cabin standing solid against the mountains. Clara walked through the door and felt peace settle over her like a blanket. This was home, real home, built on choices instead of obligations, partnership instead of desperation. That first night back after Sarah was asleep, Clara and Elias sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "What do we tell her?" Clara asked. "When she's older, about all this?" "The truth, I guess, that her father and mother fought for what was right, even when it was hard, that they made mistakes but kept trying." Elias paused. "That being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway." "She's going to have questions. About Thomas, about why people wanted to hurt us." "Then we answer them, honestly. She deserves that." Clara nodded, thinking about her daughter asleep inside. Sarah would grow up knowing her mother had been more than just someone's wife, someone's widow. She'd know Clara as someone who'd fought, survived, prevailed. That mattered. "I was thinking," Elias said slowly, "about expanding the farm. Maybe buying adjacent land, building something bigger. Sarah's going to need a room of her own eventually. Maybe more than one, if—" He stopped, suddenly awkward. Clara smiled. "If what?" "If we have more children, someday, if you want." The thought should have terrified her. More children meant more people to protect, more opportunities for things to go wrong. But instead it filled her with quiet hope. "I'd like that," she said. "Someday, when things are really settled." "Things might never be really settled. Life doesn't work that way." "Then when we're ready to handle unsettled." Elias laughed, the sound warm in the night air. "Fair enough." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to crickets and the distant sound of the creek. Clara thought about the woman she'd been in that Nebraska courtroom, terrified and desperate, and certain she had no options. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone from another life. She'd been judged her whole life. For her size, her lack of education, her quiet acceptance of limitations others imposed. People had looked at her and seen weakness, seen someone to be pitied or dismissed or exploited. They'd all been wrong. Strength, Clara had learned, wasn't about physical size or loud confidence or never being afraid. It was about endurance, about getting knocked down and standing back up, about protecting what mattered even when the cost was high. She'd been strong all along. She just hadn't known it yet. Over the next months, they built the addition to the cabin, planted more crops, integrated themselves into the small community of farmers and families scattered across the valley. Clara made friends, real friends, not just acquaintances, women who valued her for her sharp mind and steady hands, who didn't care about her past or her weight or anything except who she was now. She taught Sarah to read using the books she'd ordered from Portland. She learned to preserve food for winter, to treat common ailments with herbs from her garden, to negotiate fair prices with the merchants in town who assumed women could be easily cheated. They assumed wrong. News came periodically from Kansas City. Samuel had retired from marshal work, his leg wound making the physical demands too difficult. He'd become a consultant instead, helping train new agents. He wrote occasionally, his letters full of dry humor and updates on people Clara had testified against. Wells had been promoted to chief marshal, one of the first women to hold such a position. She'd written once to thank Clara for her testimony, for her courage, for proving that ordinary people could stand against corruption and win. Clara had kept that letter, tucked into the same box where she kept her mother's jewelry and the few photographs they'd managed to take over the years. Reminders of who she'd been, who she'd become. 3 years after Whitlock's conviction, a letter arrived that Clara had been half expecting, half dreading. The bank in Nebraska had finally settled Thomas's estate. After all debts were paid and legal fees deducted, there was a small sum remaining. Not much, but something. "Blood money," Clara said, reading the notice. "It's your money," Elias corrected. "You earned it. Everything you went through, everything you survived, you earned it." Clara thought about that. In a way, he was right. She'd paid for this money with fear and pain and nearly her life. But she also didn't want it, didn't want anything that connected her to that time. "We'll use it for Sarah's education," she decided. "Save it until she's old enough for school, then send her somewhere good. Portland, maybe, or San Francisco. Somewhere she can become anything she wants. She'll want to be just like her mother," Elias said. "Then she'll want to be someone who didn't quit when things got hard. Someone who stood up for what was right, even when it cost everything." Clara folded the letter carefully. "I can live with that." Sarah grew up strong and curious, asking questions about everything and accepting nothing at face value. She had her mother's stubbornness and her father's calm assessment of danger. By the time she was 7, she could shoot straight, ride hard, and argue her way out of most situations. She also knew, because Clara told her, about Thomas. About the grandfather she'd never met who'd tried to do the right thing and paid for it with his life. About the criminals who'd come after their family and how her parents had fought back. "Were you scared, Mama?" Sarah asked one night while Clara tucked her into bed. "Terrified," Clara admitted. "Every single time. But you did it anyway." "Yes." "Why?" Clara thought about how to answer that. Because some things are worth being scared for. You, for instance, your papa, making sure bad people face consequences. Those things mattered more than my fear. Sarah considered this, her young face serious. "When I grow up, I want to be brave like you." "You already are, sweetheart. You just don't know it yet." Years passed. The farm prospered, slowly but steadily. Clara and Elias had 2 more children, a boy who looked like his father and a girl who had Clara's eyes. The cabin expanded again and then again until it was more house than cabin. Clara's hair started showing gray at the temples. Her body, which had carried her through so much, began showing the wear of hard work and harder times. But she wore those marks proudly, evidence of survival. On her 40th birthday, Elias gave her a leather-bound journal. "For your thoughts," he said. "Stories you want to remember, or forget, whatever you need." Clara opened it, running her fingers over the blank pages. "I wouldn't even know where to start." "Start at the beginning, the courthouse. Tell it honest." So she did. Over the next year, Clara filled that journal with everything: the fear, the violence, the desperate choices, and narrow escapes. She wrote about Thomas, both the truth and the myth. She wrote about learning to shoot, learning to stand her ground, learning that she was worth more than anyone had told her. She wrote it all down so she wouldn't forget, so her children would know. So someday maybe other women in impossible situations might read it and realize they had options beyond surrender. When Sarah turned 18, Clara gave her the journal. "This is who I was," she said, "who I am, the good parts and the bad parts and everything in between. I want you to have it." Sarah read it in 3 days, barely sleeping. When she finished, she looked at her mother with new eyes. "I had no idea," she whispered. "Most people don't. They look at me and see a farmer's wife, someone ordinary." "You're not ordinary, Mama. You're extraordinary." Clara smiled. "No, sweetheart, I'm exactly ordinary. That's the point. Ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they have to. Never forget that." Sarah didn't. She went to college in San Francisco, became a teacher, and eventually a principal. She fought for women's education, for fair wages, for all the things her mother had been denied. And when people asked where she got her strength, she told them about Clara. Clara Whitmore Crowe, who'd been underestimated her whole life until she proved everyone wrong. Elias died peacefully at 67, his heart simply giving out one morning while they worked in the garden together. Clara held him as he went, whispering that she loved him, that he'd been everything she'd needed when she didn't know what she needed. She buried him on their land, under the oak tree he'd planted their first year. And though the grief was deep and real, she didn't break. She'd survived too much to break now. Clara lived another 20 years after Elias, long enough to see her grandchildren born, long enough to watch Sarah become everything she'd hoped, long enough to know that the life she'd built, the choices she'd made, had mattered. On her last day, surrounded by family in the house she and Elias had built together, Clara looked back on everything with clear eyes. The fear, the violence, the impossible choices. She wouldn't wish them on anyone, but she also wouldn't trade them. They'd made her who she was, and who she was had been enough. More than enough. She'd been dismissed as weak, as stupid, as less than because of her body and her background and her gender. She'd been forced into an impossible situation by men who saw her as property to be redistributed. But she'd refused to stay dismissed, refused to accept their judgment, refused to be anything less than exactly who she chose to become. That was the truth Clara carried with her to the end. Not that she'd been special or chosen or destined for greatness, but that she'd been ordinary and determined and unwilling to quit. And sometimes that was all it took to change everything. Her last words, whispered to Sarah, who leaned close to hear them, were simple and true. "Don't let anyone make you small, ever." Sarah promised, and she kept that promise, and taught her own children to keep it, and they taught theirs. Clara's story became family legend, then local history, a reminder that courage didn't require perfection. It just required showing up, again and again, even when you were terrified, especially when you were terrified. The farm stayed in the family for 3 generations before eventually being sold. But before it changed hands, Sarah's granddaughter walked the property one last time, standing where Clara and Elias had stood, looking at the mountains they'd looked at. She found the oak tree, old and massive now, and the simple stone marker beneath it. Clara Whitmore Crowe, 1836 to 1903. She refused to break standing there in the Oregon sun. Clara's great-granddaughter understood something fundamental. Her ancestor hadn't been a hero in any traditional sense. She'd been a woman dealt a terrible hand who'd played it as best she could. She'd been scared and angry and imperfect, but she'd also been unbreakable. And that, more than anything, was what mattered. The world tried to break women like Clara every day, tried to convince them they were less, worthless, powerless. Most of the time, tragically, it succeeded. But sometimes, a woman looked at those expectations and said no. Sometimes she stood her ground and fought back and refused to accept limitations others imposed. Sometimes she won, and when she did, she changed the world. Not in grand sweeping gestures, but in small persistent ways, by proving it could be done, by showing other women what was possible, by refusing to let fear or shame or judgment define her worth. Clara Whitmore had walked into that courthouse a widow with no options and walked out a survivor with a future she built herself. The path between those 2 points had been violent and terrifying and marked by losses that never fully healed. But she'd walked it, and in walking it, she'd proven something essential. That strength wasn't about size or gender or education or any of the arbitrary measures society used to judge worth. Strength was about choosing to stand when falling would be easier, about protecting what mattered no matter the cost, about enduring when endurance seemed impossible. Clara had been strong all along. The courthouse hadn't made her strong. The gunfights hadn't made her strong. The journey west, the trials, the final confrontation with Whitlock, none of it had made her strong. It had just revealed what was already there. And that was the lesson her descendants carried forward, the gift she'd given them without even meaning to. That ordinary people, dismissed, underestimated, written off, contained extraordinary reserves of courage and determination. All they had to do was refuse to quit. Clara Whitmore Crowe had refused. And in refusing, she'd won more than freedom or justice or peace. She'd won herself. The right to define who she was instead of accepting definitions others imposed. The right to choose her own path instead of following the one prescribed. That was the victory that mattered, not the criminals brought to justice or the corruption exposed or the lives saved, though those mattered too. But the simple, profound triumph of a woman who'd been told her whole life that she didn't matter, proving, definitively and forever, that she did. She mattered, her choices mattered, her life mattered, and in the end, that was everything.